Hi, everybody. It's David Wildstein at the New Jersey Globe. This is our marathon post-election live stream. We're going to talk about what happened in the governor's race, what happened in legislative races, what it means for New Jersey coming forward. And I'm fortunate to be with three people that are better at this than me, so they can prop me up. Joey Fox, New Jersey Globe, Zach Blackburn, New Jersey Globe, and Micah Rasmussen, the director of the Rebovich Institute of New Jersey Politics at Rider University.
And New Jersey Globe adjacent.
And New Jersey Globe adjacent, right? The official university of the New Jersey Globe. So Micah, let's start with you. Like, what happened? I mean, we were here a week ago tonight, and we were sort of, this is bracing for a close race. It wasn't.
Ironically, that's about the time when we started to see what we were seeing. And what was that? You know what? I looked a lot at voting methods this year and turnout, even more than the polls. I know we're going to talk about the polls and their failure to pick this up. But what did pick this up? Sorry for the clock.
Yeah.
What in the world?
What did pick this up? And you know what? People are probably sick of me talking about it. But if you watch the votes coming in from voting by mail to the 9 days of the early voting to Election Day, the turnout told the story. And what the story was Democrats and Republicans were coming out, but Democrats were coming out in such high numbers that they were just swamping the Republicans. There was nothing the Republicans could do to keep up. And that very first day of in-person early voting, Republicans were counting on a big vote. They thought that they were gonna just swamp the Democrats, start cutting into that VBM lead, and it didn't materialize. And it wasn't that the Orthodox community wasn't showing up. It wasn't that the rest of Ocean County Republicans weren't showing up. It was that every time they hit, Hudson Democrats were coming back stronger, or Essex Democrats weren't coming back stronger. And then, we finally got to Election Day, and they've got a counter now. Jack's got a counter, that 300,000 voter advantage, and got to cut in and do the same thing on Election Day that she's done ahead of Election Day. And hour by hour, it was clear that Democrats were still piling it on, that they weren't falling behind in Election Day. They were still going ahead in Election Day. So if you did the math, and again, very simplistic analysis, 300,000 advantage before Election Day, and you built up another 100,000 on Election Day, that's your margin. That's Mikey Sherrill's margin. And so it just didn't stop. It was just a question of turnout. It wasn't a bad turnout from Jack. He was hitting some of those numbers he thought he needed to hit based on 21 turnout. In a way, he had the same problem that the pollsters had, which was he didn't know how to forecast what the turnout model should look like.
Yeah. Zach, was this ever close, or was this sort of an outcome that was going to happen this way from the very beginning?
Yeah, I think last week, but before the primary, we went heavily on this race is competitive, but that doesn't necessarily mean close. And in the end, not close at all. And I don't think it ever could have been close, frankly. Especially with a Republican who, the tag MAGA can stick with him because he embraced Trump to a certain extent. If he had run a perfect campaign, I still don't think there's a route to victory for Jack Ciattarelli. And we saw similar numbers in Virginia and elsewhere in the country. But yeah, I don't think at the end of the day this really could have been close without just major changes in the environment.
Yeah. I mean, Joey, you and Zach fought me during, a discussion on where to put this race for the voter guide. I was like, maybe we should play it, a little safer, toss up. I'm seeing all these polls. You guys fought me and you won. Thank you both for not putting us in that place. But Joey, what talk about that and talk about the elephant in the room was Donald Trump, and you can't we might as well start with it because you can't really discuss this race in detail without talking about the Trump factor.
I mean, if we're going to talk about interior voters guide ratings discussions, I would also like to take credit for making our rating in the 2nd district competitive at all. Otherwise, that might have ended up in solid Republican, and we would be really having an egg on our face there. But we'll get to that later, much later, obviously. And then one quick addendum to Micah's point about the turnout. I didn't really realize this statistic until today when someone on Twitter kind of prompted me to look at it. If Jack Ciattarelli got as many votes as he got on Tuesday in 2021, he would have won. He got more votes than Phil Murphy 2021. Yeah. It just, the electorate was in a totally different place than it was then. And that wasn't even close to enough in this sort of reworked electorate.
And I think that partly speaks to why a lot of Ciattarelli folks were confident, was because they were seeing an increase in the amount of enthusiasm. And there were 120,000 plus extra people as there were compared to 2021.
That's one of the oldest rules in politics. You can't prevent your opponents from turning out. I mean, unless you're Roger Stone and it's 1981. But you only have control.
By the way, Roger Stone won that for Tom Kaine. So
right. You only have control over the votes that you win and the people you get out to the polls. If you win every voter you need to win and your opponent just gets more, then you've run a good race, and that was just lights out. And that's kind of, I think Jack Ciattarelli, missteps and all, ran a good race here. I think both candidates came out of this with like pretty solid campaigns that did what they thought they needed to do. It just turns out that Cheryl was had a much better read on the pulse of the electorate here. And so that sort of gets into the Trump factor, which is, I forget if I said this on this live stream. I know I mentioned it on a different Cook Political Report podcast, but how New Jersey and Virginia, if you look at their elections over the years, tend to be more correlated than people think. New Jersey and Virginia, they'll have their presidential elections, and then oftentimes the gubernatorial election that's the next year will represent a relatively similar swing. Like if one gets 7 points bluer from the prior year, then the other does something similar. And this year, people were talking about Virginia like a blowout and talking about New Jersey like a toss-up. Mm-hmm. And that kind of that pings something in my brain, whereas like maybe people are either wrong about Virginia or New Jersey here. Like, it would be surprising to me if Abigail Spanberger, on this Trump effect, right? She was running heavily against the federal government layoffs. She was running heavily against the shutdown, all these other things that are going on in Washington. It would be surprising to me if that propelled her to a landslide victory, and yet Mikey Sherrill is winning by 2 points or losing to Jack Ciattarelli. And so I think that was ultimately, I think Sherrill capitalized on every sort of layup that was handed to her really well throughout the campaign, but it was also in a situation where there were a lot of favorable things that were being punted towards Democrats here, right? You know, Trump is not a particularly popular president. He keeps on doing things that seem almost engineered to make him less popular in blue states and in New Jersey, Gateway Tunnel being the most obvious. And it takes a race that Jack Ciattarelli really, really wanted to be fought on local lines and really wanted to be fought on, do you think your property tax bill is too high? Do you think that your schools aren't good enough? And it turned it into a race of, do you want a governor who says he gives Trump an A grade, or do you want a governor who will stand up to what's happening? And that's, in a midterm electorate, the latter is usually the more effective message. And that's just what this ended up being.
Yeah. Jack was stuck. He was absolutely stuck between a rock and a hard place. There was nothing he could do. In fact, when he gave Trump an A, I'm sure Trump is saying, why didn't he give me an A+? And there was just nothing he could do. He was completely stuck.
And if he gave Trump an F, he probably would have lost by more. Because then that wins him almost 0 extra votes, and it loses him conservative votes.
That was exactly the calculation. Yeah. But he really played into Sherrill's hand with that grade, with no differences, with I agree with you on everything, including Gateway. He played exactly into the Sherrill strategy. He fed right into that.
Yeah.
And I think that Republicans looked at the 2024 presidential result in New Jersey, and it's too early to say this definitively, but just purely based on these two results, 2024 and then 2025, it seems like Republicans took the electorate saying one thing, which is, we didn't like Joe Biden, we didn't like high prices, we want to change, and took it to mean something very different, which is, we really like Donald Trump and we want Republicans to be in charge of things and do Republican things on immigration and on abortion and on whatever else. This can be a whole other discussion, but I think you saw that most clearly in Latino communities, which swung enormously towards Trump in 2024. And then when presented with more of just sort of a Democrat versus Republican race, I think Mikey Sherrill and Jack Ciattarelli they're not too far off from sort of a generic Democrat is how you would say it in a poll, but just sort of like a mainstream Democrat who's a pretty decent encapsulation of their party. When confronted with sort of a straightforward race like that, a lot of those towns, you can't necessarily say a lot of those voters because turnout was different and you might have different voters actually showing up, but a lot of those towns reverted right back to where they were before.
Yeah.
It turns out that at least in this one race, the sort of Trump effect and the 2024 effect that had that had Republicans thinking New Jersey was a swing state is pretty ephemeral. It disappeared almost immediately.
And not only were they returning right to where they were before in terms of percentage margin for Democrats,
Sure.
They boosted turnout. I mean, if you look at 2021 versus 2025 and sees like Newark and Jersey City and Hoboken, even though those also had mayoral races that helped. A lot of these cities increased turnout by cycle over cycle by 30%, 40%, even 50%. It really just
I think one of the mistakes that Republicans candidates make, and we've seen this, over the years since Trump first got elected, is they make the mistake of thinking that they can just get his votes. And there are people that are just going to vote for Donald Trump, but they're not going to vote for everybody else who says they're going to be like Donald Trump. I mean, I agree with you. I think, one of the things that hurt Ciattarelli is that he was caught in the middle. And I think this would have been him or anybody else, certainly not Bramnick, but he couldn't turn out his voters. He got, nearly 1.4 million votes. That's the most votes a Republican has ever received in a gubernatorial election in New Jersey. That's more than Tom Kean got in '85. It's more than the dreaded Chris Christie got. Is it
the second most votes anyone has ever gotten behind Mikey Sherrill's number 1? I think it might be.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to go back and look at that 20 Senate race with that presidential turnout. But
in a gubernatorial race.
In a gubernatorial, yeah, Mikey Sherrill most votes, and
but I mean Jack Ciattarelli number 2. Like these are the two all-time.
Could be
just like how after the 2020 presidential election, I think the two all-time highest vote getters were Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I think that might be like this here.
But what you saw is Democrats got their groove back in urban areas too. Certainly more than what they've gotten in the last few cycles. They built an infrastructure to turn voters out. You saw places like Newark and Elizabeth and Patterson that were 125 to 145% higher turnout in 25 than they were in 21. It seems to be like, I'll tell you, if you had asked me, people did ask and we talked about it. I wasn't sure that Mikey Sherrill's strategy was the best strategy. I thought she was, maybe missing some things and that this race was closer, but as it turns out, sometimes I'm wrong. And I have to point out, because I got a text, my friend, Senator Loretta Weinberg, is watching this, which adds a lot of pressure because I don't want to make any mistakes that Senator Weinberg will never hesitate to call me out on. And that's great. It's one of the reasons I like her so much. But the reality is, I think Mikey Sherrill ran a much better campain that she was being given credit for. You heard Democrats saying,
including my ass,
doing this. Well, why? Yeah, I mean, she's it turns out this is what worked, which is talk about Trump, talk about federal issues. When suburban women heard helicopter pilot, prosecutor, mother of 4, that was something that convinced people to come out and vote for her. She had a likability factor was, we just weren't seeing it. And then on top
it's
of
kind
that,
of funny because people have known about that for years. That was like
yeah,
the whole appeal of her, was that she had this remarkable sway where it just voters met her and heard her bio and were like, I'm in. And
Yeah.
then for 8 months there, we all, I think, including at various different points along the way, all four of us on this live stream kind of forgot that. And then voters, both in the primary and general, sort of reminded us again of like, oh, this actually does work. Her critics might say it's not enough. They might say it's all style over substance, whatever, but it works. Like voters just like it. They go along with it. It's great.
And so it was, when you win by 13, 14 points, and you win by a margin of 400, what's it up to now? Like 450,000, something like that. I mean, you don't get those kind of numbers with a bad campaign. You get those kind of numbers with a good campaign. And her group was, they're smarter than I am. There's no doubt about it. And it doesn't mean that Chittarelli ran a bad race. I think Chittarelli ran a really good race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everything he could, but it was, it was just not where the state and the country was. And, Joey, I remember I read election night, which was all one, 2 days all crammed into one, but it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, and you sent the, what you were posting for, is the lead story. And I remember what struck me was that Mikey Sherrill won all of those swing counties, all of those, the ones that went for Trump, the ones that, had sort of broken for Chittarelli the last time. Joey, what, I mean, in particular, like Gloucester, Atlantic, Passaic, what happened there?
Like heading into the 2024 presidential election, I think people generally saw there being 5 swing counties in New Jersey. Well, actually, I don't know. I would say they saw there being 4 swing counties in New Jersey. Those being Morris, Gloucester, Cumberland, and Atlantic, all of which had voted for Joe Biden in 2020. All 4 went for Trump, and then it turns out secret surprise 5th swing county, Passaic County, also went for Trump. And that was still clearly a Democratic victory, right? Kamala Harris still won by 6 points. So you could have had a generally successful election night for Democrats on Tuesday that would still involve losing those 5 counties. But there was sort of a question of, if Sherrill is doing pretty well, if this is turning into something a little bit more like the old New Jersey coalition, how much of a dent can she make in those swing areas? And it turns out she made a huge dent. She flipped all 5 back. People have been focusing on Bloris a lot, because that's the first time that a Democrat has won it since 1973. And that's the exact kind of county Mikey Sherrill represented in Congress. So there's a big mitigating factor there. But clearly they like her. This is the type of county that even when Democrats win by a lot in New Jersey, they don't necessarily win Morris, because it's just historically Republican. I think that perhaps an even more optimistic result for Democrats is Passaic. That was the secret surprise swing county in 2024, that is maybe actually not a swing county really, and was just in that one set of circumstances because Sherrill won it by 15 points. I think that set of 5 counties is a really interesting cross-section of New Jersey, because they're all pretty different, and they all are they're not necessarily going to swing in tandem. They're going to do different things. Cumberland and Passaic have much bigger Hispanic populations. Morris is much more suburban. Gloucester always confuses me a little bit, because it's got this weird combination of, it's sort of got this suburby vibe that you would think would maybe be kind of like Romney, Clinton type voters, but instead it's sort of the opposite. It's this sort of middle class suburb that zigs when the country zags sometimes. But her message appealed in all of them. She won all of them. So it's not even like you can extrapolate a specific thing where you say, well, and I think this is true when you drill down into the town level too, with a couple of exceptions. There's a few areas of the state, like I was noticing northern and central Bergen County weren't amazing for Sherrill. A couple of other areas that don't look like, I think Milburn doesn't look super great for her. Local factors, yada, yada. Yeah. But in general, you can drill down into any town. They almost all swung left by varying margins. And you can say, well, it seems like what she did and what Democrats are doing, at least right now, is kind of working everywhere.
Yeah. And let me do just quick correction. Milburn, Sherrill got 62% of the vote, and they elected looks like two Republicans to the township committee. Milburn, which is become real blue for the last 10 years.
Well, if Cheryl got 62%
41.
of the vote there, Harris got 68% of the vote there.
That's what
an
you're
amazing
referring
result.
to. It was a bit of a swing back. That's right.
And Murphy got 66%. So that actually, that to me doesn't strike me as an incredible result, especially given it's in her district. But whatever, that's just one random town that has some local factors.
You mentioned 73 a minute ago. We gotta set the record straight. The two times when somebody got 1.4 million votes were 69 Cahill and 73 Brendan Byrne.
But Chitterelli will hit. He's at 1.39.
He's almost what exactly.
Yeah. So
he could.
I think he'll hit that. I think he'll break Cahill. And by the way, Bill Cahill had something that Jack Chitterelli didn't have, which was the Hudson County Democratic machine. John V. Kenney, they didn't like Governor Minor from his first 8 years, so they went with Cahill. They thought they'd have an easier job there. One of the other things, and by the way, you talk. I don't want to forget this, that I talk about this Cheryl campaign. It wasn't just the DC people coming to New Jersey to run that. I heard that a lot, and that probably that wasn't really fair. But I should point out that that Brad Lawrence and Steve D'Amico, who were in the war room for Cheryl, actively involved in lots of messaging decisions and campaign advice, they have been like part of every Democratic campaign that has won statewide in New Jersey since the 1990s. I mean, it's like these are Hall of Fame kind of numbers for those guys.
Yeah, and you know what? It's amazing when you think about how long ago the 90s were, right? And when you think about staying fresh and current, and when fresh and current, I mean the TikTok campaign and the Instagram campaign we're going to be talking about for a long time. Parents heard their kids reciting about, what was wrong with Jack Chitterelli the entire month of October, in every home you heard, anybody, a kid their parents were hearing this over and over. Jack Chitterelli did this, Jack Chitterelli did that. Yeah. And so it was a fresh campaign. And by the way, what was the other thing besides the digital was defining Jack early on taxes. Was huge.
High tax huge. Jack heard it everywhere, even from the non-politically into.
This was an issue that Jack Chitterelli campaign assumed that they would have the better on the Democrat, because the Democrat always is on the back heels when it comes to taxes. So what did they do? They got out early. They defined him. They had the nickname. They backed it up with the legislative record, and they had
the slightly skeevy, like the 10% sales tax thing. I mean, we shouldn't forget that was in fact kind of an underhanded play.
It was.
But I think
it worked.
Politics goes sometimes.
It
worked, and I saw my dad a couple days before the debate, and I mean, he's 87. He is smart. He is sharp, and he says to me, "You better ask Jack Chitterelli why he's raising the sales taxes. Tell him that's not a good idea." And I said, "I don't think Chitterelli's really raising the sales tax." And he said, "Yes, he is. I saw it on television." And Cheryl did a really good job defining him on some of those issues where you can't win as a Republican. It's hard to win as a Republican in New Jersey anyway. But if you're viewed as the one more likely to raise taxes than the Democratic candidate, that should have been a strong indication of where this was going. Which brings me into my next thing. And I've been ranting on this for a while, but Zach, I'll start with you. But I want to hear from all of you about this. Like, what are we going to do about these polls? The polls stink. They're terrible. They have and I don't want to say it's deliberate, because I don't think it's deliberate, but they have an effect on framing a race. It's sort of putting a thumb on a scale. They affect strategy. They affect fundraising. They affect how hard people work, and they're they're fundamentally wrong. But all of us, I'm the biggest idiot of all with this. Oh, there's a poll. Let's write about this poll. Let's put it up. This is news. And at what point are we all going to stop?
But can I don't want to offer my answer. Zach's first, but
You go first for free.
How was Cheryl hurt by the bad polling showing it was closer than it was? Was she hurt this time by that? I know how Jack was 4 years ago. I know that.
No, actually, I think they were relying on their numbers. I don't think at the end of the day they were paying any attention at all. I think they were just sort of.
I'm asking you.
Yeah, I think they were laughing about it, but I think what it did is it affected how people were viewing the race, and
But it seems like probably in a mostly positive way. If it got more people to the polls,
I don't know.
I mean, I'm not defending the polls as they were, but I'm just sort of saying in terms of, unlike in 2021, where you can make a reasonable argument that did in fact have sort of a negative effect just on participation and sort of the atmosphere of the race. I think that creating a more competitive race where one does not exist doesn't have really that same kind of deleterious impact.
Well, the interesting too is that 2021, that polling miss was what sparked so much of the concerns, because Mikey Sherrill led the vast majority of polls, and especially in the closing rounds, just by a steady margin. But the thing in the back of the minds of Democrats was, what if the poll was missed just like last time? And the poll was missed even more than last time, but in the completely opposite direction. And so when you just which
is what happens with polls sometimes. Polls have underestimated Republicans enough in recent elections that people have started to think that's the only direction polls ever underestimate anybody. But that's not true. It can happen in either direction.
And it especially happens when you're trying to model turnout for a race like this, and it gets weirder. And then all of a sudden, cities like Jersey City and Hoboken and Newark, their turnout goes up 40% year cycle over cycle, and then that just blows everything up. There's no, because it's not just calling someone and trying to get their answer down and then just putting it in a flat number. It's, you got to be able to predict the turnout model, balance it across the state, balance different types of voters and turnout expectations. And it's getting weirder and weirder every year. And I think pollsters are just really struggling to keep up.
So I took Atlas's partisan shares. How many Democrats was Cheryl going to be supported by? How many Republicans were Jack? How about what was their split on the unaffiliated vote? I took that and I applied to what I thought the turnout model was going to be. And I used 2021 just for back of the envelope. This is before the election. And I came up with, if you took the 2021 electorate and you applied it to Atlas's numbers, you came up with about 7 or 8 points. I bet you if you actually took what the electorate looked like this week and you applied Atlas's numbers, they'd be just fine. So their findings were okay as far as attitudes. They just modeled the electorate wrong, I think is one big problem. The other big problem, I don't know to what extent, is I think late breaking undecided votes going in Cheryl's direction at the last minute after everybody was out of the field, except for Zogby, because he was in the field on Monday.
Yeah.
And he caught something that nobody else caught. I'm going to speculate if he's the last one out, maybe that's why he caught it. But late breakers are going to be invisible to everybody else. They would have missed that entirely.
Well, and look, you also have more people, this whole thing about, likely voters, you have voters that are so likely to vote that they had weeks before. And that changes, that changes it all too. This banking of votes, this, push to get people out. I mean, and look, I think one of the things that Republicans are, they've said in the last couple of years they see it, but they didn't really effectuate it. They're not going to be competitive until they accept the fact that vote by mail is real. It's safe, and there, you can't take a big part of the voting process and say, well, we don't want to participate in that part. We'll let the other there was a Republican candidate for council in Rockaway, Tucker Kelly, and he was just chasing every vote by mail. He had the list, he was going in, he was out, ringing doorbells saying, "You've got your ballot, return it," or, but then you look at what, the machines that the George Norcross and Kevin McCabe have built, where they didn't just say, okay, we're gonna hit our we're gonna watch and chase these ballots. They said, well, you know what? If we can get the ballot into the voter's kitchen, they're more likely to vote. And so they have converted, systematically converted targeted voters to say, sign up to get a ballot automatically. They have run these campaigns, and they don't do it in the final weeks. They do it, throughout the year. And they say, sign up for a ballot, get the ballot. It's more convenient. It's better. This is a better way of voting and as a result, what you saw this year is roughly the same number of Democrats and Republicans were returning their ballots this time, but the number of Democrats that were getting the ballots was just, incredibly lopsided. And by the way, I don't want to forget too, it's been a long time for me where you sort of look at somebody under a pseudonym, but you Mish Voter on Twitter just killed it this year, and Vote Hub. What an incredibly valuable resource to everybody that these guys were.
I got to do something fun with Mish Voter and with Michael Pruser from Decision Desk on election day. They were keeping in touch. They were getting the pulse reports that parties get in order to get out the vote. They were getting them every 2 hours, and we started with what they can do, what they can crunch in 5 minutes takes me all day, right? So they were each keeping in touch with various counties, and we would add throughout the day. By the end of the day, we had 13 counties. We had a pretty good handle on what the turnout was in well over half of the state, and we were seeing who was coming out to vote. It was pretty cool. I got to aggregate it, just sit back and just watch what they were doing and go along for the ride. It was a lot of fun. But there are different, to your point, David, there are different ways and methods of getting out the vote throughout the state. We see the Brian Stack model. We see the Middlesex model, which is based on the Camden model. We see the Lakewood model. And I agree with you. The chase this time was kind of a new thing for Republicans. It was pretty effective. That's why they got that boost in the return rates they had. But what I think is in common with all the best models is the habit of voting, and building that year after year after year habit. And I'll tell you, we admire that all the time. But one of the really cool results this time, not a model, but one of the really cool results, because as you said earlier, Zach, Jersey City and Hoboken had mayoral races, which really helped to drive their turnout, which helped the Sherrill campaign and helped every Democrat who was on the ballot. But the one that you really have to take your hat off to is Newark, because Newark got well over 40,000 votes out. They haven't done that for a non-presidential year in over 20 years. We've talked a lot about how voters there have gotten out of the habit of voting. They really stepped it up this time. It was one of the genuine surprises, I think, of Election Day. They said they were going to do it. We wanted to see the money where the mouth was, and they got big numbers out of Newark. Yeah, and
I can't let this be a post-election show without talking about Brian Stack, and just old school. This guy with hundreds of volunteers walking down the street, barking orders at them. Stack is the kind of guy, if he delivered 99% of the vote, he'd be upset that he left 1% on the table and he couldn't get them out. But I mean, he walks down the street with these index cards and handing the cards. This, I don't know. I should have him one night on to talk about his color coding of cards, but he'll get to this card and he'll say, oh, this is a green card. This is this is a blue card. This is yellow. And he knows exactly what to do and messaging and who's responsible for getting them out. And it's like that old ward system that, we saw in, in the last hurrah and just knowing how to turn out your votes and county committee that is accountable for actually working, as opposed to, living on social media and showing up at events and doing, I want everybody, I want everybody to know that I'm here and doing the selfies, but people that actually work. And I think that's, one of the things that Democrats did well on this time is getting people that were actually out there working. They were out there canvassing. The unions did their job.
Republicans and Democrats alike can admire Stack. I mean, he really is.
Yeah.
He's got, and of course, you've helped to tell that tale. I mean, you've helped to tell the story of how he does it. One of my favorite lines, the night before the election, he's with Micah Sherrill's right next to him. She's in Union City. She knows where she needs to be, and he says, all the work that we've done up until now, vote by mail, early voting, forget it. We're starting from zero.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what we built up. We're starting over tomorrow. And now we're getting every vote out that we can. It was amazing. Yeah. The guy doesn't give up. He doesn't stop.
I said to somebody recently that, can you imagine if some presidential candidate in 2028 just, they took Brian Stack and Phil Loggia and they just moved them to Iowa and New Hampshire and just put everything into just the two guys. So, they're old school still works when, when you have, you have boots on the ground that can convince people to vote.
We should probably mention the three mayors who did not deliver. And that was the three of the four Democratic mayors who said they were supporting Jack Ciattarelli did not deliver their towns. Yeah. And the only one who did was Branchville in Sussex County. That one went for Ciattarelli. But
that's firstly because that's just a red town that happens to have a Democratic mayor.
Exactly. Yeah, it happens to have a Democratic mayor. That's right. But North Bergen, big time, went for Sherrill, despite the mayor's endorsement. Mm-hmm. And Garfield went for Sherrill, and Dover went for Sherrill. So
Garfield is in particular crazy. It was Trump +9 last year, and then Sherrill +21. So the mayor did all of that, thinking that his town was going in one direction, and then his voters were like, "No."
Yeah,
that's a good point. That's a good point, Joey. Because one of the things I had said earlier on, you don't expect a mayor to get too far out in front of his town, and he clearly thought that he was on solid ice.
Right.
With last year's result.
We've seen that before. Dawn Adiego thought her district was going one way. It wasn't really there yet, and she got sort of called out on it. Yeah. Now Everett Garntoe he's thinking his town is someplace that is not yet.
It was really one of the big head fakes of this campaign was, and Fox really blew up this story. How many Democratic mayors were defecting and how many were supporting Ciattarelli. And of course, by the end, this became the story. What you guys aren't seeing is all the Democratic support that Jack's going to get, and you're not counting the crossover vote, and his followers really believe that. It was a complete head fake. First of all, the story was there were over a dozen. There weren't. There were four. And second of all, none of them could deliver anything.
Yeah, and it's hard for people to deliver. I mean, it really, it's. There are certain offices, I'll go back to Brian Stack for a second. I always find this part of, first of all, I find everything about Brian Stack sort of amazing. And there is, by the way, this entire, group of people on Twitter that are fascinated all over the country. And they're fascinated by Brian Stack because of that old school thing. But he does not tell the residents of Union City who to vote for in presidential elections. He says people are going to make up their own minds anyway. They're not doing it on the basis of him telling them, and he doesn't want his own voters to feel, that they're devalued in terms of making up their own minds. So he doesn't do that. And, and I'm sort of wondering, in this gubernatorial campaign with this kind of turnout, were people just making up their own minds too? Were they, it was a combination of Mikey's likability. It was, where Trump is, is that the case? Were these endorsements as important as they used to be?
No, you hit it on the head. It's not, and you've talked about this in other forums. I think you wrote about, or you talked about it, I think in one of your mornings, was the Inside Edge. It's not the endorsement; it's the work you put behind the endorsement. That's all there is to it. The endorsement is meaningless. It's how hard you're willing to back it up.
Yeah. So Zach, one of the other things, I'll start with you on this. It's one of the things that people in the media, you heard about it from Republicans, you heard about it from Democrats quietly, which was that Mikey Sherrill wasn't laying out a lot of specifics. And now I see, she didn't need to. She knew what was going to play. And then polling, by the way, is. I'm skeptical of the head-to-heads, but I get the value of saying what issues are going to work and what's going to cause people to vote for you. She gets to be governor of New Jersey without 100 campaign promises that Phil Murphy had made, that now he's worrying about how am I going to keep them. She got there without just sort of not over promising. That's a trap that a lot of people fall into. She didn't over promise. How's that going to affect, in a positive way, I guess, how does that affect her governing?
Well, I guess it just leaves more doors open. I mean, she didn't necessarily overpromise. It seems like she promised just the right amount. I mean, voters, especially these days, aren't going to have the breadth of knowledge to be like, oh, I liked Mikey Sherrill's first 100 proposals, but that 101st one was really the one that pushed me over. But one she can stick by, freezing is that state of emergency freezing utility rates, first time homeowner help and support. When she can stick on those and just really make those a key feature, that's enough. And she kind of emphasized that in her transition press conference. It ended up being enough, even if it didn't necessarily please love activists or wonkish types.
And look, at the end of the day, she just connected with voters, and she connected with voters. She connected with people during the NJ 11th for Change, cattle call of candidates wanting to take Rodney Frelinghuysen out. She, four general elections, a primary. I mean, this is a candidate that has overperformed electorally in every race she's ever been in. And, now I just sort of think like why did I think she might not this time when she has every time?
The only thing
overperformed polls and such too.
Yeah. The only thing I will say about campaign promises is that they can form an agenda. And I think an agenda is important for not just for the governor, but for the people around the governor. And it's something. It's how you measure your progress, and it's how you measure what you're accomplishing. And sometimes second terms, I think, are a little rudderless, and it has to do with promising less. It has to do with less of an agenda. We're just going to get stuff done. I think you need to have targets, and I'm not saying she won't have targets. I'm not saying she won't have goals that she'll set up. With her transition teams, in her inaugural speech and her budget address, very, very probably she will. But I think it's important sometimes to have something you're working toward.
Yeah. I mean, I think that voters delivered a very clear, they elected Mikey Sherrill by a big margin. They elected a shockingly high number of Democratic Assembly members. They sort of delivered a mandate, but it's slightly unclear what it's a mandate for, right? It's when Phil Murphy won in 2017, it was a mandate sort of against the policies of the Chris Christie administration and for a lot of the policies that Murphy was promoting. This time, it's a mandate certainly against Trump and against Republicans, but that's not really an action item. That's more of just a general Democratic posture. It's a mandate in favor of Mikey Sherrill as a candidate and as a governor, but you can't deliver on mom of four and helicopter pilot. That's not sort of an action item. That is something that voters simply liked about her and supported her for. And so you kind of have to wonder, you're going to have this enormous Democratic Assembly majority. You're going to have this governor who's sort of riding high. She's probably going to go into office with relatively high approval ratings, just given, how much voters clearly liked her when they were directly confronted with her. The question is then, what exactly does she do in her early days beyond fighting against Trump, beyond this utility rate freeze, however she accomplishes that makes it clear why voters did this in the first place.
Yeah, and Joey, did you wanted to add something about polling too before I forget?
Yeah, I'm going to wind back the clock back to that conversation just because I did have one extra point on that, which is, in terms of sort of talking about polling misses, you sometimes have individual polls that miss, right? That is a nature of the polling industry, where polls have margins of error built in that sort of give you a range of where the result might land. That is sort of, that is the statistical integrity of the poll is such that even if you had a good sample, you might still end up with some variation, and you still might have sort of a wonky sample in one way or another, and then the poll is off by even more. But you would expect, if the polls are sort of on the target on something, that in the aggregate, they would land somewhere in the right area. Whereas in this case, every single poll, I don't think there was I think the highest margin Sherrill had in any poll this entire fall was from her super PAC, which had her up by 12. And even that was a slight underestimate. So the actual range that you have, clearly something was wrong with the way that the pollsters were thinking about the electorate and about how voters were going to behave. Because if they were on the money, you would think that some polls would have been Sherrill plus 20 and some polls would have been Sherrill plus 6, instead of some polls being tied and some polls being Sherrill.
By the way, Eagleton had one of each, right?
Well, sure.
Eagleton had one that was
stupid now, but also there are some issues with that.
She was up 20 points originally,
right?
And then she's up 5.
Boom, boom, boom.
She lost.
So that starts to get into the issue, which is that you saw in 2021 pollsters all sort of herding around this Murphy plus 8, Murphy plus 9 zone. That was wrong. You saw in 2024 pollsters herding around this Harris plus 15 kind of realm. That was wrong. And now this time you had pollsters herding around Sherrill plus 6 or so, and that was wrong. It seems to a certain extent like pollsters are taking data that is perfectly valid data. They're talking to voters. They're getting, to Micah's point before, you look at some of the data, and it's, and it's basically right in terms of attitudes by party. And they're kind of then assuming an electorate that gets them to the number that feels right. Right? You kind of feel like Murphy is winning by 9-ish. So you end up with a poll that kind of puts you in that realm. You feel like Kamala Harris is going to win by about as much as Democrats have won New Jersey in all of the previous presidential elections. So you get a poll that puts you in that realm. You feel like Sherrill is up, but it's a competitive race. So you get a poll that puts you in that realm. And it just sort of speaks to, I don't necessarily want to impugn the pollsters' motives here, but it sort of speaks to the subjectivity in some ways of the industry, that it's hard to explain this without really having the idea that pollsters are expecting a certain outcome, and then given a whole bunch of variables, that is the outcome that their polls end up showing, which then feeds into the narrative of what the outcome is, and it keeps on going in a loop until the loop is finally broken by election day, which says actually that was wrong the whole time.
When you think about it, what we're asking for to some extent is unknowable, right? Obviously, we know this, but when an electorate can change as much as it has from election to election, you're always going to be chasing the last one,
right?
It's like it's the same in police work. You're always chasing the last disaster instead of the next disaster. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you.
You have to guess where it's going to land next time.
And we as journalists do that too, right? I mean, we were all operating in this election under the shadow of 2021 and 2024. We saw those two most recent statewide elections and said, well, shit, maybe we don't know what's happening in New Jersey. Clearly, we keep on going into these elections thinking the Democrats are going to win by a lot, and then we're wrong. So I guess we've got to pay really close attention to this one, because that seems to be where New Jersey is going. And so we were chasing what we saw then without realizing how things had changed now.
Yeah, I mean, and you look at you look at a place like Hunterdon County. I mean, Jack Ciattarelli won it by, a little over 3,000 votes. And, that's
maybe that's how you have to put together your model, though, David, because I think if the four of us were sitting in a room and trying to figure this out, we probably could have told you that Hunterdon was moving. It was probably still Republican, but it wasn't as Republican as it used to be. I mean, we sort of sense that, right? Maybe we could have put together a model if we had gone county by county and figured it out like that.
Yeah, and it could be. I mean, one of the reasons that that Cheryl, got the sort of the launch that she did with, support of, her home county in Essex and Curry and Passaic, McCabe and in Middlesex and Vin Gopal and Monmouth and, and Peg Schaefer and Morris and, in her own region, but they viewed her as electable. They viewed her as the person they least needed to worry about being able to beat Jack Ciattarelli, who had come within 3 points 4 years ago. And he, and it turned out they were right, but I want to ask this question. I do it reluctantly because we don't like to do the what ifs, but at least not on a live stream. We do it with each other all the time. But are there any of the 5 other Democratic candidates that also would not be the governor-elect today?
I think that this was an election, given what we see with the electorate, and especially given New Jersey in sort of the context of what else happened nationwide, not just Virginia, but like Georgia Democrats won 2 statewide elections by ridiculous margins, like 25-point margins. And the Pennsylvania
legislative races in Mississippi.
Yeah, and Pennsylvania Supreme Court retention, the California gerrymandering proposition, these things just won by landslides. I kind of think that this election was going to be won by a Democrat against a Republican, pretty much regardless of the identity of the Democrat or the Republican. Do I think that the margin might be different if it was, let's just sort of say, Ros Baraka, the most progressive Democrat versus John Bramnick, the most moderate Republican. That's a matchup that Republicans probably wouldn't have minded kind of litigating. That's something that puts Democrats would have to defend a lot of positions that they, at least instinctively, would think hurt them statewide. Ros Baraka would challenge that proposition. He has sort of his own theory of politics on that. But that's the kind of situation where you would think just in a vacuum, like, oh yeah, really left-wing Democrat, really moderate Republican, maybe they have a shot. I still don't think so. I think that this electorate was just not going to elect a Republican. I don't think that that's where they were at.
Micah, Zach, do you agree with that?
Yeah, sort of on the flip side, I was trying to think, I don't think John Bramnick or Bill Spadia do any better than Jack Ciattarelli did. I don't. Yeah.
And would they have done any worse? Would they have done any worse than Jack? Jack Ciattarelli ran a great campaign. He was disciplined on message. He was a good candidate. His campaign was operating on all cylinders. Is this just sort of insert a Republican here? Would Spadia have done any less than 43? Would Bramnick?
My instinct is to say maybe yes, but maybe not to a significant amount. Like I don't think they would maybe dip below 40 or anything like that. But I don't know if John Bram, like it's impossible to talk about the hypotheticals, but I don't know if John Bramnick would struggle to get MAGA voters out. I don't know if maybe Bill Spadia would further drive away moderates or people who had happened to remain with Jack. Mm-hmm. Maybe there are only 3 Democratic mayors who endorse Bill Spadia rather than 4. But it's hard to know.
So my bias has to be that campaigning matters. My bias has to be the candidate quality matters. I can't not believe those things, right? I understand the concept of a wave that just gets swept in, but I also think, I've been saying a lot this week, fortune favors the prepared, and you have to be ready to take advantage and ride that in. And she was, and it's not so much would the electorate have found the other 5 Democrats acceptable or likable as her. Maybe they would have, maybe they wouldn't have. That's possible, right? We can't say. But would they have made the same decisions along the way? Would a progressive have defined Jack on taxes the way that Cheryl did? Would she, would a progressive have run to the right of him on taxes the way? It's really hard to say that somebody would have made the same decisions that she did. I think there's good reason to believe that she zigged while they might have zagged in a number of cases in this race where she did the thing that you wouldn't have expected the Democrat to do. So I think that all matters. I really do. I think she was the right candidate for the right time.
To your question about Spadia, I was about to call you Jack. David, I think one thing that Jack's campaign did that shouldn't be sort of underestimated is he was able to do what he wasn't able really to do in 2021, which was convince national Republicans that this was competitive, right? He got tens of millions of dollars of investments from outside Republicans, outside groups, and he made, I think you talked to a Republican, especially in the last couple of weeks of the campaign, and if they were talking honestly, they would probably say that Cheryl is favored, but all of them thought it was still at least competitive. Chitterelli's campaign did the work to make it so that he was sort of in the ball game. And that might have been one of the early, maybe not even Spadia's fault, but I think that might have been one of the very early knock-on effects of a Spadia nomination, if that had come to pass, is I'm not sure if he would have been able to do that. I think that you kind of saw Republicans go all in on New Jersey this year because they saw the Virginia governor's race as just sort of increasingly out of reach. And you kind of have to wonder if Bill Spadia had won the nomination, whether they would have, looked at their options and made the opposite decision and said, okay, we've got this radio host who takes these very conservative positions and doesn't really have an electoral track record. And Democrats think that they can just absolutely sort of slaughter him in attack ads. Maybe that's not where we put our cavalry. So that I think was sort of a key crux in like June and July, when the Chitterelli campaign was kind of making that argument and national Republicans were receptive that, and you can maybe even argue that John Bramnick would have also had a more difficult time, as he doesn't have those same connections. And he, would maybe struggle more to convince a pretty magnified national Republican scene that he was worth investing in. Yeah. So that to me feels like one specific way that Chitterelli was pretty strong.
Now I think the big question, and there's no clear answer at all, but where does the New Jersey Republican Party go from here?
Right. They've been building up to Jack for years. And now like they're great hope.
And if MAGA continues to be toxic to New Jersey at large, but the primary electorate refuses to support anyone who isn't MAGA, how does that reconcile in the long run?
That's exactly how Republicans have kind of whittled themselves into irrelevancy in some other blue leaning states. Yep. And I could totally see it starting, especially with the county line gone. The county line was sort of a guard against candidates who would just be more conservative than New Jersey could really handle getting into top positions. If those sort of guardrails start to fall away, then I think that's absolutely a possibility.
One of the things that I thought was interesting is we're sort of looking at Chitterelli in sort of that U.S. Senate range this year.
Yes.
So he's at 43%. Bob Hugin, spending $40 million, was at 43%. Steve Lonigan against Cory Booker was at 43. Curtis Basho was at 44.
So are you saying that Jack Chitterelli should run for U.S. Senate against Cory Booker next year?
No, I'm definitely not saying that. by the way, for those who see him on social media, Jack should give it. Jack Chitterelli's done. He took a shot. Maybe 2021 was his year.
Mm-hmm.
That was his time, and the national Republicans didn't see that, but this may just be where Republicans are, and it's hard to compare them because what you had were two good candidates. To say 43 is about where Republicans are would not be properly crediting Congresswoman Cheryl for being as good a candidate as she turned out to be in the campaign, being as what turned out to be right, and again, I keep, we're going all over the lot, and that's my fault here again, as usual. But we go back to these polls, and what Joey, you said something that is now stuck in my head, which is maybe the bad polling was good for the race, and the fact that Democrats got nervous because of all these polls, it made a lot of these organizations work harder, and push harder to chase vote by mail and turn out people on election day and do all the things they needed to do in order to make sure they won.
And they get a lot better of sort of a lot better stories and a lot better vibes now. They kind of had to, this is always the thing about expectation management when it comes to campaigns before an election. The Cheryl campaign had to put up with a lot of sniping and a lot of sort of stories being like, is Cheryl blowing it before the election? But their reward is that, if they had gone into election the heavy favorites, then they would come out with stories saying Cheryl, the heavy favorite, wins. But instead, you get all kinds of people saying, holy crap, this is incredible. When she won by a margin that used to be free standard for New Jersey Democrats.
Micah, sorry. Say that again.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize Joe was still going. I apologize. Yeah. I've always thought that one of Joe Biden's great superpowers was being underestimated, and just being unassuming and just coming out of nowhere and just blowing over everybody's expectations.
So now she gets to be governor of New Jersey, Micah Cheryl, 57th governor. And we now start to look at what she's doing with this. So she went to Trenton. She did the meeting with Phil Murphy. By the way, to the governor's credit, he had this set up
regardless
with both candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And you saw Glenn Youngkin do that with Abigail Spanberger today as well.
Yeah. And that's that sort of transition of meeting with the candidate, doing the photo op, having a private conversation. I heard of people in the governor's office, giving tours of the State House to some Cheryl staffers, but the governor was going to do that with Jack Ciattarelli too. He was going to do this transition of power, and he should get some credit for that. But you look now at Micah's 9 o'clock clock. I remember the first time when I was sitting in his office and this thing was going on, I thought it was a fire alarm. But I've learned every hour that's is that a Rebovich?
Every hour on the 01.
It's not. It's personal. Yeah,
it's not the Rebovich clock.
We can call it that.
Yeah,
we can definitely name it that.
Okay. So today, Cheryl announced her first senior staff appointees, and we, those who are, who watch New Jersey politics closely, we know of the incredible power that comes with being chief of staff and chief counsel. And I mean, the chief of staff to the governor is effectively the chief operating officer of the state of New Jersey, with these $57 billion budget, and was of course the 40,000 employees
and an entire cabinet. I think that's one thing that got consistently overlooked this election, is that unlike almost every other state in the country where you elect some or maybe like a dozen statewide positions separately, Micah Cheryl and Alex Ball, her chief of staff, will get to choose an entire government's worth of top officials.
Yeah.
Which, who knows how a Matt Plotkin election would have gone this year? That would have been interesting to watch.
Right.
I don't know.
Matt Plotkin versus Jay Weber. Would love to see it. Yeah.
Well, that's I want to keep going with Alex Ball and Tim Lydon. I mean, I'm looking at this team. So Alex is a political professional. She managed this campaign. She didn't buckle to people who were telling her she was doing it wrong. That included me. She stood her ground. Alex and I had a couple disagreements along the way on strategy. She was right and I was wrong. The one thing that I was right about is that when she moved to New Jersey, I told her about Star Tavern, and best pizza in New Jersey, in my view, and Alex agrees. So we are in sync on pizza. But here's somebody who doesn't have, she ran Josh Gottheimer's first campaign that beat Garrett. She came back to do the Cheryl campaign. She was Cheryl's chief of staff in Congress. But maybe one of the things that's interesting is she doesn't have these independent long-term relationships with all the people where she has to, worry about, well, I can't say no to this county chairman. We've been friends for all this time, and I want to, make sure that I can still get in the door when I'm gone. Micah, you've worked in a governor's office. What's the the strength of a chief of staff who I hope this is not inappropriate. Senator Weinberg, if it's inappropriate, text me and tell me that. But the one constituent rule, right? This is
your boss. Yeah.
That Alex Ball doesn't care about anybody but Mikey Sherrill.
Exactly.
And then so what's the and we had your friend Jamie Foxx. He didn't care if he had to run a Mack truck through a brick wall if he needed to.
Yeah.
What does that look like to the how is that in terms of dealing with the legislature, dealing with advocacy groups and constituency groups when your loyalty is all one person? I think that's pretty good, but
yeah, I think it's good for everybody because it tells everybody right from the outset what your agenda is, what your loyalty is. There's no question. You know exactly who you're advocating for. You know exactly where they're coming from. There's no ulterior motive. I think it's great. I think it's great for all the cats that she's going to have to herd, and I think that's really important. What I really like about somebody with a deep political background like Alex is that she will be able to deal with the party and the chairs, which is an important part of who she's got to deal with on a daily basis. She's been dealing with them, obviously, the whole campaign long. So that's a key constituency, and the legislators. And so she knows how to deal with both those. We've certainly seen chiefs of staff very competent in their own right who don't have the political background, right? Diane Scicchetti, somebody I worked with at DOT for a long time. Amazing new state government backwards and forwards, which, let's face it, this team has not worked in Trenton before, right? So that's going to be a skill set that they're going to have to get up to speed on. But when you know the politics, when you know the how to deal with a county chair and how to deal with a state senator, that's so much of the battle. That's when you know politics, I think that's an underrated quality in a chief of staff.
But look at the second most powerful position in the governor's office is chief counsel. And there you have, I mean, you can't, in terms of knowing state government and the legislature, you're not going to find anybody, for Mikey Sherrill that's better than Tim Lydon. I mean, he was executive director of the Senate Majority Office, both under Steve Sweeney and Nick Scutari. He knows, he's got, relationships with all of the senators because there's no freshman senators coming in. And, he was cabinet secretary under Corzine. He was chief of staff to Congressman John Adler. And I mean, and this one, by the way, this is the one that sort of baffles people in terms of what you're looking at, the different kind of gravitas you have here. In between serving as executive director to two Senate presidents, he spent 8 years as a Superior Court judge, being given, really complex litigation cases in Mercer County, which is the vicinage that deals with everything having to do with state government.
Exactly.
You're talking about here, a first-class legal mind and a first-class political mind, and the, it sort of, to me, in terms of chief counsels, and I'm not ranking them, and I'm not, they all had, certain strengths, but Tim Lydon sort of reminds me of Carrie Edwards as chief of staff to Tom Kean in the first term. That balance of sharpness of brains and the law, but also an ability to sit with a senator and talk to them? Is that, I mean, and, you know, has she sort of signaled here that she's going to hit the ground running with a person who gets the politics, who's going to, run the traps and protect Mikey Sherrill politically, and a partner in Tim Lydon who understands government, state government?
Yeah, and the fact that they're coming from the campaign, the fact that that she's comfortable with them, that they're going to, that she's leaned on them, that they steered a very successful campaign, and that they know exactly who their boss is and where they're coming from. It's really the ideal situation for her to be hitting the ground running, as you say, from the start. I think she's going to be incredibly well served by them, because she is being served by them now.
Yeah. And I think that's, and Lydon, I should point out, took a leave from the Senate to go run the policy shop at Sherrill for governor and be counsel to that campaign. So she's, there's a lot of interesting things going on. Before, we should shift over to the legislature now, since there were a lot of interesting races and more of those. I want to do, just before I go, just final thoughts on the governor's race, which, by the way, we'll come back to. We shouldn't even do final thoughts, because we're going to come back to the governor's race. It relates to regions of legislative battles, but we got to talk. I don't want 4 hours to go by before we talk about the lieutenant governors. Dale Caldwell is the chair of her transition team, and Kelly Doucette, who's like a trusted advisor. She was Mikey Sherrill's district director in Congress, is the executive director. They're sort of, keeping everything, close, within this tightly knit organization. But tell me about, okay, I think about, and not at all in a negative way, but here's Dale Caldwell. It's a couple months ago, he had he was president of Centenary College, former school board member in New Brunswick. Now he's going to be a heartbeat away from the governorship. Does this guy just have to be pinching himself as to, his great fortune of 2025? Nobody wants that. Nobody's,
I feel like you made the point.
I don't have much to say other than yeah.
I will also say that it's a tough time to be in a small, private, independent college, and it's definitely a nice career move for him. Yes, let's say.
Do you wish that Sherrill picked you instead, Micah? Would that have been...
especially the smaller the school gets?
But I heard
about as small as it gets.
The pressure on the next president of Cincinnati University is going to be immense.
Yeah. I'm not going to make any jokes about who's available now, but
hey, Governor Kane became a college president.
Yes. Anecdotally, both of the lieutenant governor candidates got really good reviews out on the campaign trail.
Jim Gannon won an election,
right?
Yeah, Gannon won, and
there were a bunch of Sherrill Gannon voters.
Yeah.
It's not often that you can go 1 for 2 on an election night. It's kind of strange to me that that's even allowed, but regardless.
But he's he seemed to connect too, and I don't know. I still am not of the belief that a lieutenant governor candidate, I'd say it doesn't win you the election, but I need to point out that John Corzine got a whole lot more votes in Bergen County in 2009 because he picked Lorena Weinberg and not Barbara Bono, and that made a big difference there in terms of Corzine carrying that county.
My sense is that Caldwell, as a Black minister, when they started their outreach to Black churches, when they were drawing up their plans, he was a key figure. He was a trusted figure. He was a fellow Black minister. He's a colleague. So I think he did help in ways that we may not all have seen. because he wasn't out there, overshadowing his boss, which is not his job on the campaign trail. But I think he definitely brought a lot to the table that we may not have necessarily appreciated or seen behind the scenes.
And notably, neither were necessarily attack dogs for their bosses, which you sometimes see with lieutenant governor nominees.
Their bosses are kind of willing to be their own attack dogs.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we saw during their 57-minute debate that they were both hugely huge. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist it.
I think they hit 58, maybe.
Bring us back to that era, David. We've all
but
we've all moved on from those dark days.
And by the way, I'm not going to dwell on this, but I thought that one of the reasons I really pushed so hard for another debate is I thought we were in a really close race where the people needed to see more of the candidates, and we weren't, so they didn't. But one of the things we saw in that, 57 and a half minutes is that they both praised each other. It was very much reminiscent of Sheila Oliver and Diane Allen.
Yes.
And
it's four sort of elder statesman types who have been chosen for lieutenant governor in a row.
Yeah.
I think that none of them are sort of like all of these candidates had the option. Like Chitterelli, for example, was considering Mike and Gannemort, who fits sort of the young kind of attack dog mold a lot better. They had these options, and they instead went for someone who would be sort of more of just someone who didn't necessarily have higher political ambitions themselves, and who would be a governing partner and sort of just a solid asset without a ton of drawbacks.
Yeah, I mean, we know there's so many states that elect governors and lieutenant governors in separate elections, and now I'm dwelling on it, so I'll stop after this one. But 2009, Micah, no doubt that even as Chris Christie beat John Corzine in a separate election, Loretta Weinberg was going to wipe the floor with Kim Guadagno.
100%.
Could you imagine what that era would have been like?
Oh my God!
If Christie Weinberg
was the governor and Loretta Weinberg was the lieutenant governor.
Oh my God!
Every time Chris Christie leaves,
he went out of the state. Loretta Weinberg is nominating judges and running down the hall to Sweeney saying, "Quick, confirm them right away." And
Planned Parenthood gets an extra billion every single time Christie crosses the river.
Yeah,
This is why we rewrote the rules of the Electoral College, right? The same thing, Yeah,
that's exactly it. So let's talk about the legislature and what happened here, and the fact that 5 assembly seats.
If you want to pull up the slideshow too.
Yeah, do that. But 5 assembly seats flipped this year, and 6 assembly seats flipped 2 years ago. And Republicans, after doing well and winning a few seats, making this surprise foothold in 21, they are at 23 seats. This is their lowest number. They were down to 14 after Watergate. They're at 23 seats. That's may not even be a relevant number in the legislature. They don't need Republicans for an emergency anymore. They need, the speaker's going to need Democrats that may not be, part of the party system where he can just say, I need it. And they say, sure. But Republicans, it can't be a fun place to be for Republicans. So let's go through.
Well, wait, before you talk about what an fun place is going to be, absent the kind of wave that we just saw, actually maybe absent a wave that's multiple times bigger than what we just saw. Can you think about how many cycles it would take to build your way out of this basement, right? Yeah. You need a wave that's significantly bigger than +5 in either direction, right? It's a long slog back. And when Democrats in the legislature were building their way back in the 90s, it was a few at a time, but it was a steady drip that led up to 2001. These guys get a little bit forward, and then they get blown right back again. It's really a tough road for them, that's for sure.
Yeah, look, here's the thing with this was I remember Chitterelli in 21 saying, if it wasn't a gerrymandered map and I can get a legislature that I could work with, we can fix this state. And we have a map that was a deal map between Democrats and Republicans that was supposed to, create a path. And now it's not the fault of Judge Karchman or anything else, but it's just the circumstance of how this is all worked out.
We said that this was an opportunity map. Democrats have taken all the opportunities.
Yeah, they've won. There's not much left on the table. This could have gone.
But there is more left on the table because I think every single one of the people who is on this slide right now are in a district where there's a Republican state senator.
Yeah,
so Republicans who consider themselves quite lucky that state Senate was on the ballot this year.
And two of them have. And Sweeney's running mate, are done. Who knows, right? And Rowan, so there's two more assembly seats there potentially. On the table.
And by the way, I believe more. I know. The Globe called it today for Don Guardian. I looked at where these provisional ballots are from. I believe very strongly that Maureen Rowan is going to win this race. Claire Swift is going to lose. I want to. We like to be cautious on these calling of races, but I think she's going to be there. This is going to be 5 seats. Joey, maybe you and Zach, you two did the voters guide. Walk through these 5.
Well, so Zach, can I start with a quick just overview kind of point, which is that in 2021, 2023, and 2025, each time both parties by the end of the election cycle had kind of agreed on a battleground that like everyone knew was very close. And then there were sort of the reach seats that both parties would acknowledge were sort of a heavier lift. And in all 3 of those election cycles, one party won at least one of those reach districts. In 2021, Republicans flipped the 11th district, which people knew was kind of competitive, but thought the Democrats were favored. And then they also won the 3rd district. That was Steve Sweeney's district, which no one thought was even on the playing field, really. In 2023, Democrats sort of swept the competitive playing field, and then they also got Andrea Katz in LD8, which I think everybody thought was leaning towards the Republicans. And then this year, you look at this sheet here, everyone knew that LD3 was competitive. Democrats held on there. Everyone knew that LD8 was competitive. Democrats swept there. And everyone knew that LD21 was competitive. That was finally, Republicans have been sort of defying partisan gravity for years. This was finally the year that they lost. But then LD25, the Marissa Sweeney, and then LD2, Maureen Rowan, both of those seats were seats that Democrats and Republicans alike would have admitted were probably not going to go blue.
And where Democrats weren't really spending much money to back them.
Yeah. And LD2 is especially ironic because Democrats spent a ton of money there in both 2021 and 2023, only to be heartbroken each time. And then the second they pull out, it's like, we're actually going to elect an assemblywoman now.
Who does that remind you of someone? Andrea Katz?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and you sort of wonder too, was it the in those cases in 2 and 25, were they helped by people thinking, the incumbents are going to win. We don't have to pour money in there,
Probably. I think it turned it into sort of a generic ballot race. Yeah. I think that, Ora Dunn and Kristen Branco and Claire Swift and Don Guardian all have decent profiles that allowed them to outrun Jack Chitterelli by some. Yeah. But I think Micah Sherrill won both these districts. I think she won LD2 by a decent clip. I'm less confident on the numbers in LD25, but probably by a fair margin there too.
That's her congressional district, so that makes
right, exactly. Sense. LD25 is her home territory. Yeah. So at a certain point, most voters. You talk about split ticket voters and swing voters a lot, but most voters go into the polling place, and New Jersey ballots are even designed like this. You just vote down the line. You like one party, you like one party's gubernatorial candidate. Why wouldn't you also vote for the other people who are aligned with them? And I think that you're seeing that in Sweeney and Rowan this year. And just sort of more generally, these upsets that I was talking about in 21, 23, and 25, each time one party has done better than expectations would generally have them do. Republicans outperformed expectations in 2021, and then Democrats in both 23 and 25. And we're getting to a point in state politics where the individual distinctions within districts and the individual distinctions among incumbents are no longer as important as just sort of how the state is feeling overall. If the state's voters are clearly leaning in one partisan direction, that just starts to sweep up all kinds of seats. It's less important than ever who the incumbent is and how much money has been spent and what the dynamics of the race are. If, especially in a gubernatorial year where you've got someone at the top of the ticket and there's their own dynamics there, that just starts to sweep districts along. It starts to matter a lot less all of the factors that we think should matter a lot, which is who are you actually electing?
Yeah, I mean, in 2021 and 25, I thought they were in play in 2019. They turned out not to be. It just wasn't right.
21 was in play. It just ended up with a GOP win.
Yeah, but not that close at the end. So and a lot of money spent there. And then I'm looking at all of a sudden now I'm trying to catch up on what what I didn't think I needed to know. And I was I'm trying to learn about Marissa Sweeney and Maureen Rowan and I started watching Marissa Sweeney's TikTok videos, her Facebook reels. I mean, she's got a bigger reach on social media than I imagined. And one thing I saw, there was she comes on one of these and I guess somebody did one bit of mail where they just they labeled her as typical Democrat, wants to raise your taxes, all those things that are just cookie cutter. But she comes on and she's got this really serious tone to her. And she says, look, everybody, I want you to, I want to talk about this. There were some pictures taken of me a long time ago when I was very young. And, and I just want to address them because they are what they are. And she shows literature and she says, yeah, I had blue hair 10 years ago. I think I look pretty cool, but the Republicans decided to use the photo. And I'm thinking, like, holy crap, that really, that connects with people. That,
blue-haired liberals are winning Morris County.
Because we remember what happened.
And purple-haired liberals are the Hunterdon County Democratic chairman today. So we're it might be the way it is, but it just showed there was some kind of a cool factor to the way they were doing it, and I'm looking at this and I'm seeing dozens and dozens of these videos she did herself, low budget, and I'm seeing this huge number of likes and interactions, and you sort of have to look at those things too. But can we go through some, Joey? Can we just go through our toss-up districts first and talk about those? Start with
this. Totally cut over Zach before, so I can.
Oh, go ahead, Zach. Go ahead.
Toss it to Zach.
I don't have anything. Do you want to go toss-ups?
Yeah. Do the toss-up districts and start in District 3.
Start in District 3.
Go.
Go.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, you go.
So, yes, sir. I'll do whatever you want. So this is the one. South Jersey Democrats were nervous about this district.
Yeah.
And Joey, you told me Mike, Jack Ciattarelli won 3 again. And
I don't have the exact numbers, but I did that by eyeballing, and I saw some people on Twitter who are seemingly confirming it, that it was Ciattarelli plus 2 or 3, which is not that bad for Cheryl. For this district, that's pretty good for Cheryl, but it still means that Simmons and Bailey had to outrun the top of the ticket.
That's because Cheryl was winning Cumberland County.
Right.
Cumberland portion,
yeah.
And winning Gloucester too.
Yeah, and I haven't seen Bridgeton or anything, but you see this district was, not,
remember, Bridgeton isn't in this district anymore.
I'm sorry?
Remember, Bridgeton isn't in this district.
Bridgeton's not this district anymore. That's right. I don't know why I said that, because I knew that, but I'm getting old. I mean, this wasn't a blowout by the Democrats. This was a competitive race, and this is a place where that edge on vote by mail and building up a bank of voters really paid off. One of the things that I noticed is that in Salem County, and Salem County is a red county. I don't remember what Ciattarelli's numbers were in Salem, but
he won it 17.
58-41. So he won Salem by 17 17 points. And then, here's the assembly race, and Dave Bailey, who's from Salem County, who's got remember, Salem County is the size of Old Bridge. So, you can become well known there fairly easily. He's involved in this nonprofit, area of helping kids. He only lost Salem County by 1,500 votes. Mm-hmm. And, that's a huge deal there. And then in the Gloucester portion, they blew it out by like 5,000, and then Cumberland, the Republicans won by 1,300 or so. But this is, this is one of these places where, George Norcross and Mickey Quinn and Michael Mueller and that team, Askew, he doesn't even have a first name anymore. He's just Askew. Everybody knows what I mean. But they ran an aggressive campaign. They left no stone unturned. There were a lot of votes cast there. This is what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to, run at it and throw everything you have there.
Yeah, and you mentioned the vote by mail, the mail-in vote. The Democratic firewall in these counties worked the way that it's supposed to, the way that it's designed to work, which is that Republicans will start to cut into it and they will start to offset it on election day. The question is, can they completely breach it? And they didn't. It wasn't a situation like in the rest of the state where Democrats kept on piling on election day. Republicans were cutting in Salem on election day. They were cutting in Cumberland, and but by the time we got to election day in Gloucester, there were 10,000 votes built up already. And so when voting when the in-person early wound up being relatively even, when election day wound up being relatively even, it was those 10,000 votes that were determinative in those races in Gloucester County. So, they just have this huge asset. They know how to do it. They do it every year, and they've got it, and it's an insurance policy.
I mean, Joey, this is, we've got 2 more elections under this map before we get a new map. It's amazing how quickly it goes, but
especially when it's 2 years shorter, right?
Yes, especially 20% shorter, absolutely. But this district's going to be in play under this map for the duration.
Yeah,
or
I don't see how it falls off the plane.
Yeah, I would imagine this goes into next year as the top Democratic held district that like 2 Democrats are in.
Yeah. I think it has shown a stubborn statewide Republican voting trend, right? It voted for Trump all 3 times. It voted for Chitterelli twice. That's, I thought after 2021 that it might kind of just fall off the radar for Democrats. The Democrats would just sort of cut their losses. And South Jersey Democrats made a very calculated play not to do that in 2023. I sort of started out that cycle thinking that was probably the wrong move and that they were throwing their money at nothing. Turns out I was totally wrong and they won. I think that if they had not made that move, then maybe it would just be gone. But as long as Democrats hold it, Republicans are going to be in contention. You're probably going to keep on seeing results like this, right? I mean, this was a great night for New Jersey Democrats, and you still are seeing Simmons and Bailey win by a 51 to 49% margin.
Yeah, so, if 2 years from now the environment shifts just a handful of points to the right, this is right down. This is a razor's edge race.
Yeah. And you can't make up the financial advantage. Republicans are never going to compete financially with South Jersey Democrats in South Jersey. Micah, somebody said something to me today that I thought was interesting. They said that if it wasn't Ed Durr, who happened to have been on the ballot against Steve Sweeney in 21, if it was somebody else who happened to have won, Beth Ann McCarthy Patrick running for Senate instead, what was the impact on Durr on this district flipping back 2 years ago anyway?
Yeah, for sure. It was huge. He got it, and then he treated it like his toy, his launching point to go do other things and, do the MAGA stuff and not be a serious legislator, he probably could have held it if he had buckled down, let's say, the way Heather Simmons has and is out everywhere all the time. And, he may have been able to make a stronger run on it, wouldn't have been able to offset the money, wouldn't have been able to offset the mail-in, but he could have made a better run at holding it. He set in motion, that one race set in motion the rest of the decade that we're still talking about, this ripple effect.
Right.
And yeah.
So you had John Berzicelli who won that by 6 points or so. Helped the Democrats. Helped Simmons and Bailey flip the seats, and now
we'll be back on the ballot 2 years from now.
Right, but he wasn't there now.
Right.
He's the anchor, and they still won.
That's the miraculous thing. Yeah. About this turnout. If it hadn't been for this turnout, they wouldn't have had the help that they had with the Democratic votes. They would have been further back on their heels.
Yeah. So you want to go to 8 is the next one of our toss-ups?
Yes.
I mean, this was not so close as a legislative race. This is a comfortable margin.
Yeah.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, Angelozzi just slightly outrunning Andrea Katz.
Yeah.
Not by any even a statistically significant margin, I don't think.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's Democrats flipping one seat that wasn't barely even on the battlefield 2 years ago, and then finishing the job here. They beat Teresi, a strong incumbent who won outright in 2023, and Umba fell a little bit behind that when he lacked incumbency. But yeah, Pine Barrens goes Democrat.
And I mean, if you're Latham Tiber, you have to be kind of sweating, because the whole point of this election was to beat Andrea Katz in her tracks, and instead, not only did that not happen, Democrats elected a second Democratic legislator, and by a fairly decent margin.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't know that she's going to be that candidate either, but I mean, I will tell you, Angelozzi, from what I'm told, I mean, he rang, hit a lot more doors.
He did. Over 8,000 doors.
Yeah, a lot of doors.
Yeah, I mean, and this work ethic's important, and if he was at in the Atlantic portion of the district.
Has there ever been a D. Hamilton in the legislature before?
No, probably.
No, interesting.
No.
He maybe is he the Democrat from the most Republican town of any Democratic legislator? He might be.
He might be.
It could be.
Avi Schnall.
Okay, that's
yes. All right. Fair point. You're always going to win on that one.
Yeah, that is fair. But he. But
other than Schnall.
Yeah, but 8 is tough, and now
Oh, wait, Nick Scuteri now lives in Clark, so it's a contest between Nick Scuteri and Anthony.
The thing that we have to remember, we talk about the Pine Barrens, which is in the district, we talk about Hamilton, which is in the district, but the big voting block, where the district is vote rich, is some really suburban communities in Burlington that came out huge for Cheryl, and they came out huge for these guys as well. And they came
out well for Harris. I think that's one detail that's worth.
Yeah,
this is one of the districts where Harris did best. She didn't do great, but she did best relative to sort of how the rest of the state was going. LD8 kind of held up okay for her. So this is just maybe seeming like long term, like one of the parts of the state that is just the least unfriendly to Democrats,
or perhaps the least thermostatic.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pulling out the numbers now for. I mean, so Chitterelli won the 8th district 4 years ago by 9 points, and this is. I think it's going to be. This will be one of the legislative districts that flipped. I mean, I don't know.
I'm almost positive Cheryl won it. I haven't.
Yeah, I think so too.
She won Burlington by a lot. So
yeah. So that there were there were some Cheryl coattails here too. I'll ask the three of you. Is is this one now? I mean, remember, this is the one where it has been inching for a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Right. All of a sudden, it was, and it was a different map, but, 17 was close. 19 was hard fought. 21, and then, the 23 was the one flip. I think it flipped as we were doing this live stream 2 years ago.
Maybe.
And now they've got the 2 seats, and we know where Burlington's going. So Joey, the same question I asked you in District 3 is this one's, you've got a Republican senator who's going to be up with a lot of union money, but you've got a lot of Norcross money too. Are these seats in play for the rest of the decade? These 2 assembly seats in the 8th?
I think they probably stay in play. I would personally, if you were to ask me what my 2027 voters guide rating for this district is right now, I would say lean D for the assembly seats and toss up for the Senate seat. I think that the fact that Latham Tiver is still there and the fact that there's a lot of interests with a ton of money who have a real interest in keeping him there means that at a minimum in 2027, this district is still going to be pretty hard fought. I'm sort of curious to see who Republicans are run for the assembly, whether Teresa or Umba make yet another go of it or whether they find sort of a new slate. But this doesn't strike me as a district that Democrats will be able to stop paying attention to.
Yeah, I think this could very well be where, and I don't know what's inside Teresa's or Umba's head, but this could be like where Christian Branco is now saying very much what this district, the candidates in this district were saying 2 years ago, which was, we're going again. This is going to be a rematch. And
4-way rematch 3 times in a row.
Yeah. Well, maybe not a 4 for 4, but Branco saying, look, if it wasn't for this crazy turnout, things would have turned out differently. I don't want to jump ahead to 25, but I think it's possible that the candidates here would say the same thing. Like, point and a half back, we could have won this race. We could have withstood if it hadn't been for this onslaught, this blue wave. And that's not coming back again. But what's going to also happen, I also agree with Joey, is you will not outwork Katz and Angelosi, and they will continue to knock on doors. They will continue to do constituent service. They will pour it on. This is the kind of district, and I reminded too of Linda Greenstein when she got first elected. She kept on going and kept on building, and every year a little bit more and a little bit more, and all of a sudden it's not competitive anymore. And
Jeff Van Drew did that too.
Yes, he did.
Yeah,
he did.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And we're not going to talk about it tonight, I promise. But there's this whole dynamic now of Senate and Assembly, heading the ticket in 27 and no lines in primaries, and we don't know what's going to happen or who's going to come forward or who's going to come forward out of nowhere really and and make a go of it. The other thing before we leave Burlington, I should point out, and I found this number stunning. Carol Murphy got nearly 62,000 votes. She broke the Aura Dunn record that was in the 2020 all vote by mail presidential election. I mean, when 62,000 votes
for an assembly race,
for an assembly seat is just absolutely incredible.
Yeah,
they saw the long lines and the troubles in Burlington County in 2024 that depressed turnout, and they were like, "We are not letting that happen." Yeah,
I mean, this is sort of that firewall, and we saw. I think that had an impact on vote by mail, on early voting, as people didn't have a good voting experience. And Micah, you teach this in your class all the time: the importance of people. If you don't have a good voting experience, you might not be back.
Exactly. I definitely think in Burlington County, there's no question that people had that long line last year, the new machines, and decided, you know what, this time, better part of valor, I am going to just bank that vote. Maybe I'll go early, maybe I'll VBM it, but I'm not taking the risk. They didn't know that the problem had been fixed. They just remember what happened last election day. So I think there was a lot of that going on for sure.
Yeah. You want to go to 21? We're going to do our toss-ups first. I mean, this one, again, long in the making. This was a good district for Harris. This was Murphy won this district.
No. He won the old version of the 21.
The old
was in effect then, but he didn't win this version.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of takeaways on this one. The one to me is Nancy Munoz. The incumbents that you saw lose are not longtime incumbents. They're people that have only been there a few terms and not really advanced up. They don't chair committees. But Nancy Munoz has been there more than 16 years. And this is the first time she's ever run for office without John Bramnick with her. And Bramnick raised money. He knew how to connect with voters in places like Summit and Westfield, keeping himself competitive even as those towns were going from red to blue. And those towns, after some a local issue hiccup, have now returned to being blue at the local at the municipal election level. What was the effect of Bramnick not being on the ballot here? Is that as big a deal as I think it was, or would Bramnick have lost this district this year?
I think with this margin, there's a good case to be made that Bramnick could have lost if he were on the ballot. Obviously, it too depends on candidate quality. You see Andrew McCurdy slightly outrunning Vincent Kearney by about 1,000 votes.
Yeah. I do find it interesting that there was a non-zero number of voters who actually, we don't know exactly what caused that difference, but seemingly knew enough about the distinctions between the candidates who ran completely separate campaigns that they actively split their tickets.
And a little mea culpa on me. I said that Andy Kim would be rallying with Kearney and McCurdy last weekend, but it ended up, I think, from what I saw, at least the images I saw, just being McCurdy, which is interesting. And when Andy Kim did some celebration posts for a handful of assembly members who were assembly member elects who won, he shouted out McCurdy, his old pal from his Senate campaign. And that was it. So if I can't think of any other reason why McCurdy would have this 1,000 vote gap, and I think that made a difference.
Let's talk about this, because this is one of the most interesting parts of this district is the separate campaigns and separate ways of doing this. McCurdy is, I think he's the first Kim Democrat from the Kim wing of the party to win a seat in the legislature. I don't mean to say I don't know where Katie Brennan was in that race, or maybe some of the others, but the reality is McCurdy was out in front for Kim in the fall of 2023, and he's one of these people who had a house party for Andy Kim, back when that was still considered to be a really competitive U.S. Senate primary. He's a former federal prosecutor, former state prosecutor, Harvard grad, brainy guy, who was offered the help of the organization, and sort of in the spirit of Senator Kim was like, I'd rather, I want to win on my own merits. I don't, want to owe anybody. I'd rather, I'm going to do it myself. And when I get there, I'm going to be independent. And then you had, Vinnie Carney, who is more of the traditional candidate, Garwood councilman. His day job is he works as he's a sheriff's officer. He works for the county. Nick Scutari invested a ton of money in his campaign, and Carney is now sort of the that's where they keep the population up. They lost the assembly vote when Ed Rodriguez beat Sergio Granados in the 20th, but now they've got Vinnie Carney in the 21st. you don't see this often, right, Micah? You don't see separate campaigns for the assembly, not because they don't like each other, but because they just want to do their own thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's usually done because you're pooling resources because you're doing it for efficiency's sake, or because, like you said, you don't like you do or you don't like each other. And yeah, we'll see what this portends for the future. They continue to go it alone. They did this time. We'll see what happens. It's hard to see that you just. It's very interesting that it turned out the way it did with separate campaigns. We were curious to see how it would turn out. It's completely, not just in terms of pooling resources. It's completely antithetical to the usual model that we see, which is that you build name recognition together, you run those names together, you rattle the names off the tongue, you do the lawn signs, the whole thing. And so, we sort of ask ourselves, well, are they going to get together next year? Are they going to get together at all? They did just fine this way, so maybe they won't change. Maybe they'll just keep going the way they're going.
No, and I look at, so Michelle Matsakudis, who's been there 4 years, came in, right now these numbers will change, but she's 21 votes ahead of her running mate, who's been there more than 16 years. And look, the reality is even Democrats say Matsakudis was a decent legislator. She was just sort of getting her footing, and there's people on the Republican side say, I feel badly for her. She worked hard, but the one that people don't feel badly about is Nancy Munoz, because she had 16 years to establish her own independent relationship with voters in her district, and certainly in Summit and Westfield and Berkeley Heights and New Providence, which are the ridge towns in Union County that have changed considerably since she got there, and a 16-year legislator, maybe if she had done all of those things, or if she had, had her own relationship with the voters, could have withstood, built her own firewall and withstood this wave. She didn't have a ton of money stock away. She, was never a big fundraiser on her own.
I kind of think that this district was just waiting for a wave like this to hit, and it finally did. I've been since I arrived at the Globe, when I first saw the numbers in this district, I was kind of like, oh, the first real Democratic, pretty Democratic year that arrives, this one might just be gone. It's got too many Democratic voters who, in different turnout environments, and when Democrats aren't really spending money, they might be swayed to vote for their local moderate Republican legislators. But I think this day was a long time coming. And to your point about how Democrats feel kind of bad for Michelle Matsakudis, I would imagine some of the Democrats are also feeling kind of bad for, assuming that she loses, Claire Swift down in LD2. In general, just another sort of moderate Republican who would oftentimes work with Democrats on issues. One of the results of this election is, and this is how it works whenever there's a wave election that sweeps out a bunch of incumbents from one party, you're sweeping out a lot of moderate Republicans and leaving most of the conservatives. This is going to be a much smaller Republican Assembly caucus than there was, let's say, this time 3 years ago, so before the 2023 results as well. You've swept out a lot of the moderates, a lot of the people who have interest in sort of, maybe are personally more moderate ideologically, but also have an interest in winning a swing district and sort of keeping their votes in line with that. And you're left with a more coherently conservative remainder. And David, you published that story today about how there was sort of discord in the ranks during John DeMayo. John DeMayo was plenty conservative, but there was discord in the ranks about his reelection as Assembly Minority Leader.
Jay Weber is running Twitter ads expressing his discontent with John DeMayo. That is, it's very, very public. Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that we were talking about this before with the end of the county line. What does that mean for Republicans? This too. What does this mean for Republicans if the moderates who are the firewall in a lot of these districts, and maybe in 2027, if some of the equivalent moderates in the Senate start losing, what does it mean for Republicans that if their legislative caucus is mostly left with the committed conservatives who hold districts where they don't really have to worry about that.
And everybody else goes scurrying. Like, I mean, I saw Don Guardian today put out a statement about how eager he was to work with the Democrats. And, I've always worked well with the Democrats. And so,
it's true.
Which is, yeah.
It is true. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying it's the opposite strategy that you would see from other people in the caucus for sure. Right. So they're going to, it's like every man for himself, run for your life, kind of a thing.
Right. And you saw during there weren't that many competitive Republican primaries this year, but the couple that there were, LD 13 with Rich Castaldo versus Vicky Flynn, and LD 39, Bob Ott versus Frank Pallotta. The incumbents, you could tell, kind of wanted to be like, no, I'm not working with Democrats on these terrible laws out of Trenton. I hate the affordable housing law. I hate the school funding formula. I hate all this. And that, again, that kind of incentive is it's probably going to increase, and it's going to make the Republican caucus, it's going to shift it further away from this median where they're winning a lot of these districts.
Yeah. And this district was supposed to, was made a little bit better for Republicans, in the new map. And, it just, they worked their way back to it, and it didn't.
Republicans kind of had the same problem here, though, as they did in the 7th congressional district, which is all of their local people live in the towns like Westfield and Summit that are the Democratic base. So you can't make it too red, because then you just be removing the towns that are supposed to be there in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, I'm looking at two other things here, which is, it's just sort of a census thing about the legislature. This is a district where 2 women were replaced by 2 white men.
Right.
Right. And that,
I think women are overall losing numbers in the legislature this
year.
Definitely that Marissa Sweeney bumps it back up a little bit from what our expectations were.
But she beat the lone Hispanic Republican.
Right.
It knocks that number down 1 too.
Yeah. And women legislators lost in the last couple of elections, I think.
Yeah.
It's been a drip. Yeah.
So
it's one of the things that's interesting. You guys talking about the map a little bit. I'm sorry that the longer we go with this super low number, it's gonna start to impact the next map, because remember, continuity and incumbency protection are 2 of the factors that you look at in a map. The less incumbents there are to protect, and the less continuity there is to worry about, is going to start to impact how many districts the Republicans can put a claim on.
Yeah. So one of the we look at these results. We didn't get to District 2 yet, but we talked about it with 8, and then here's another one where it's a Republican senator, 2 Republican assemblymen. I don't know what John Bramnick's going to do. I don't know if he runs again or not. Bramnick is a guy who is I think his secret sauce is he's just comfortable in his own skin. He does what he feels like doing, and he doesn't need to be in public office to live a good life. He could be very happy having more time to do comedy clubs and, more time in playing golf in the winter in Florida. And he's got a really successful law practice that nobody can take away from him. So if he retires, if he runs again, this is a competitive seat. We're on agreement here. But if he retires, we're dealing with some different dynamics here. Without a line, it's not like the organization can just designate the new senator, right?
And there won't be incumbent Republican assembly members to pull from,
right? And so
there won't be.
And I don't know as much. In this district, is the drama in 27 going to be in the general, or is this a Democratic primary to watch? And McCurdy may just say, look, I ran 1,000 votes ahead of my opponent. I'm an Andy Kim Democrat. I can raise enough money on my own to be competitive. I'm just going to go to the Senate, or I don't know if Carney runs. I don't it could be I've heard Kimberly Mouded from the county commissioner from Westfield, but it could be just anybody that comes out of the box here. It could be Greg Vartan if the congressional stuff doesn't work and he's still got some money in the bank. But the reality here is, I think this is going to be I think the 21st district is potentially one of the best Democratic Senate primaries in the state in 2 years. Does that make sense?
You know more than we do.
I don't know. No, I don't. That's the issue. I don't. But what do you think?
The first time incumbents come up for re-election, their first one is always their toughest, right? Because nobody feels like they're safe. They haven't had a lot of time to build their way in yet, especially in a wave situation like this. You're definitely going to see either on the primary side or on the general side, there are people who are going to want to take their shot, and this is the best shot to take. So yeah, I could definitely see that this could draw some interest. How serious that interest becomes depends on money, depends on organization, depends on everything else.
But at the same time, and this is once again just another hypothetical, if Andrew McCurdy declares for the Senate and he gets some help from his friend Andy Kim, are Democrats really going to want to stand in the way of that? I mean, they could, and it could get really expensive and it could get ugly. But
they already kind of decided this year that they weren't going to stand in the way of him getting the assembly nomination.
Exactly. And it's beyond just, calling in a favor for Andy Kim. It's just that he is a talented candidate in his own right, who's shown that he can raise almost as much money from individual donors as Nick Scutari could just single-handedly give to Vince Carney. So
we put McCurdy, and we'll get to this too, but we put McCurdy in this independent Democratic caucus, the people who basically got there on their own, that are going to make their own decisions, that nobody's going to trade their votes for them. McCurdy's not going to be an automatic vote for leadership. He's going to have to remain convinced. He's going to have to see where it is, and you see this group of I mean, I look at some of the process issues, like Oprah. Oprah was not an issue in this campaign. In the
general election, no. I do think it was actually an issue in the primary.
Yeah, but in the general election, not at all. But here's a situation where if McCurdy had been there for the Oprah,
you notice how process means things David doesn't like, and it's substantive, right?
I think the three of us have all noticed that over the years.
I think so. I get it, but the reality is McCurdy would not have voted for this bill, but neither did Matsakudis or Munoz. But he would not have been, with the majority of the caucus on that.
And neither would Katie Brennan or Ravi Bala, probably neither Kenyatta Stewart or Ed Rodriguez, probably not Marissa Sweeney. You've got this whole new block that we don't really know how that's going to.
Exactly. Maureen Rowan, who is
Maureen Rowan is interesting because she's kind of like McCurdy. She was supported by the party organization, but sort of not in like an obviously like, yes, this is our person kind of way, and more of like a sure.
She interviewed very well. She was unknown to them. She interviewed very well. She's, a retired attorney from Philadelphia. She's, voted. I think she's lived in New Jersey about 6 years, and now she's a legislator, and nobody's really going to tell her what to do, and that's part of this group. Ed Rodriguez is going to be in this group, and I think that's going to be a If they need Republicans, it's because they can't get, I don't want to label them, but it's, it's almost, there were 5, right, Zach, that Andy Kim called out, sort of, the Kim squad.
I believe 5. Yes.
Yeah.
I believe it was Bala, Brennan, Stewart, McCurdy, and there's someone I'm forgetting, but
Sweeney, maybe Marissa Sweeney, because Rowan hasn't won.
Had it up.
I don't know, but it's an interesting group, and it's going to be part of the dynamics. So, do you want to go to the ones that we had this leans?
Chigozie Onyema, who's
Chigozie Onyema.
Yeah,
he's like
rising star.
He's almost the. I don't know how to describe him. He could have been one of the anti-machine bloc. It's just the machine got to him first, and we're like, "Hey, want to be our guy instead?" And he said, "Yeah, that sounds great." Yeah,
and he's you're going to see Chigozie Onyema be I mean, he is young, and he's really smart and aggressive, in terms of being a campaigner. You're going to see him become a real power in the legislature, and he's not going to squander the opportunity of being there the way his predecessor Garnett Hall did.
It was interesting going to a late stage campaign event with Mikey Sherrill, Mayor Baraka, Maryland Governor Westmore. I was like, oh, who put this together? It must have been a big week. Oh no, it's Chigozie Aoniema, the guy who will be in office soon. It was a good get for a guy who's still about to just enter Trenton.
Yeah. I mean, look, one of the things, we shouldn't talk about it a lot now because it's way too much in the future. But Mikey Sherrill election also means that the next open seat for governor on the Democratic side is 2033, and that knocks a whole lot of people that wanted to be governor, sort of out of the box, and
the leading lights of 2033 are people we maybe have never heard of right now.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Mikey Sherrill 8 years ago, when Phil Murphy was elected governor, was a former Navy helicopter pilot, former prosecutor, mother of 4, who was running for Congress, and now she's about to be governor. And you get these, 8 years is a long time. I don't know that Ras Baraka has the staying power to be a candidate in 2033.
Does he just stay mayor of Newark for another 8 years just to buy his time?
But but Chigozie, this is somebody, you guys, because in 8 years I'm going to be 8 years older, and maybe, whereas
we won't be.
Yeah, but you're 8 years from now, you guys are going to say, do we have to have this guy on here? He's barely coherent anymore. But just remember, I said Chigozie Aoniema for governor 33 as potential candidate. Just remember that. Let's go to the
looking for the 5th term in a row for Democrats at that point. Right? Yeah.
Well, but and we can talk about these things.
Or he's unseating Governor Spadia.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
But it's like all night long we could talk about is Jersey becoming Connecticut. Or the post Larry Hogan Maryland, or the post Charlie Baker Massachusetts, where you don't have a lot of sway in the legislature, and they're not really viewed all that competitively.
Right.
Let's go to the races that we had lean Democrat or lean Republican.
I feel like there's barely even anything to say in the lean Democrat races. The main
Should we just do a quick drive-by of
we thought they might be competitive, and then Democrats did fine.
Yeah,
good job, Dan Hutchison, Cody Miller.
It could have materialized. This is one where, again, Republicans were knocking out their vote. They were getting out their votes. Democrats were getting out more, and they couldn't get the traction. Same story in the governor's race. Same story all over the state. The Republicans weren't doing poorly at all. It's just that they couldn't gain anything on the Democrats with this kind of a turnout.
Yeah,
good job.
No,
Assemblywomen Donlin and Peter Paul, you did it without Vin Gopal on the ticket.
Yeah, but they did it. They did it a little bit with. They didn't do it with Vin Gopal on the ticket.
On the airwaves, though.
But they did it with Vin Gopal on television, because that was the more recognizable name. And not they're both viewed as quality legislators, but Gopal reminds me of, oh God, I'm going to say this and I'm going to get in trouble because it's not really what I mean. Not ideologically, not personality wise, but when it comes to political sway in a Republican area, this is like the Team Van Drew.
Yes.
Of the 2000s, right?
Yes.
This is, and that is the only similarity between Vin Gopal and Jeff Van Drew.
I love how many caveats you're like, because at me, I'm going to add all of these qualifiers.
Listen, because you think that they're along the shore. They're trying to buck the of the predominant registration in their area. Absolutely. No, and then they do break through because of their hard work and because of their connection, and they become the predominant name, and that's what you go with. That's what you use. Yeah, no, it's a very similar story. They're
So
not the same people by any means, but
this
same
one
story.
I don't think is I don't think this one's competitive in 27. Both because of Gopal on the ticket and because Luann Peterpaul, who Zach is from Livingston, and and people
See, I just don't believe you anymore.
It's
I
true.
don't think that's true.
It's true. Luann Peterpaul is from Livingston, and she, these are these are people who just they're Gopal's got them out there working, but I think it's their own personality too to be out there working, going to all these events. I don't think this district's in play.
I think Gopal showed in 2023 that when he is in charge of sort of the turnout model, and when he gets to define the race is unwinnable. And the question for this year for Republicans was, can they really make headway when he's not directly on the ballot and when there's other factors beyond him that are sort of driving things? Obviously, most voters were coming to the polls because of Chitterelli versus Sherrill, not because of the assembly race. And they showed that, no, it's still fine for Democrats. This is still a blue-leaning district. 2021 was maybe just more of an anomaly than anything. And this district has gotten bluer since 2021. Yeah. I think if this map had been in place in 2021, at minimum, Joanne Downey would have won re-election. So yeah, this one feels like it's off the playing field. And then the next one on our list, I think that's next in the slideshow, LD 16, feels...
It is not on the slideshow. I apologize.
Damn. I mean, it doesn't even really belong on the slideshow because it was just such an easy Democratic win. I mean, they won by a combined 59-41 or 60-40.
Yeah.
And that's just a district that Republicans want to be competitive kind of in their souls because it's Chitterelli's old district. When it was under its old map form before 2011, it was a GOP leading district. A lot of Republicans live in Hillsborough and Montgomery and Princeton, this Bill Spadia's district. They would really, really like to be able to compete in it, and they super can't. It's just over.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you just think about the demographics of this wave, right? You think about more educated, higher income, right? You're just not going to beat turnout in South Brunswick and in Princeton. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And as much as Jack wanted to compete in the Somerset County towns, he did better, but he didn't win them. He didn't win those towns. So it was just there was nowhere to go in this district to find the turnout that they needed.
Yeah. And I mean, you have Roy Fryman, Michelle Drulis, they're quality legislators. Fryman chairs, a big committee, and they've all figured this out. And today Tom Malinowski announced that he was running in the 7th and
in the 11th.
In the 11th, and his campaign manager Kaylee Haverstraw was the campaign manager for Fryman and Drulis, and Drulis was Malinowski's district director. So he's taking somebody who just came off a big race and drove up these numbers. So yeah, 16, we're all in agreement, not in play anymore under this current map.
Yeah, I think it might be over.
Yeah.
And then I see that also we don't have on the slideshow, and I think it's, again, not unreasonable, 36 and 38. 38 is sort of both Bergen districts. 38 is sort of a district that Republicans have wanted to be more competitive than it really is for a long time. 36 is the Democrats have been pretty firmly in charge for a while, but then both the districts actually voted for Trump last year. But 36 in particular is Trump almost +5. So that was kind of making Republicans encourage. And again, Democrats just kind of lights outed them. I mean, 36 in particular, I think Democrats are getting more than a combined 60% of the vote. So I would be slightly, just given the demographics of those districts, I would be slightly less willing to just sort of remove them from the playing field entirely. But I think Lisa Swain, Chris Tully, Clinton Calabrese, Gary Scher, they all kind of have it figured out, and Bergen Republicans super don't have it figured out.
Yeah. Well, look, they were never beating Calabrese and Scher. I mean, you got to, despite the Trump numbers in South Bergen and Trump winning the city of Passaic, Gary Sher was never losing Passaic, and Clinton Calabrese was never losing Cliffside Park. They had anchors, they had bases there that were just never going anywhere.
All right. If we're going to move on to a likely Democratic district, we've got LD30 up here, where, like I mentioned earlier, Avi Schnall held on in this deep red district. It was closer than 2023. That's just mainly because turnout in a gubernatorial year increased in several of the non-Lakewood areas of the district. And so he beat Thompson by like 4, which it doubles up into like 8-ish points here. Which is less than 2023, but still a solid margin for him. Lakewood just shows they can continue to turn out. Last I checked, their percentage of turnout was 93.5% of what it was in 2024 in the presidential year. And I doubt that there will be a number close to that in any other town in the state.
Yeah, and again, with the Senate, we don't know what Bob Singer's plans are, but if Bob Singer doesn't run again, and Bob Singer, a Lakewood guy, and has the support of the VOD, but without Bob Singer, if in 2027, without a top of the ticket, when the Senate is the top of the ticket, if Avi Schnall wants to go to the Senate, then he's just going to go to the Senate, and this becomes sort of an automatic pickup. I don't think there's anything anybody can do about it. And then, it gives them, considerable sway, and again creates this problem when it gets to redistricting and what they're going to do. But Lakewood's population, I don't want to say population. The voter registration in Lakewood increased by 23% between 2021 and 2025. I don't think there's any place in the state that will come even near that, and Lakewood is still growing. And I think this is just this immovable force, and a town that is Republican, but you'll have a Democratic senator there. And by the way, if the Democrats are in control of the Senate and there's a Democratic governor, and your interest is bringing resources back to your district, Lakewood wants a Democratic senator. So,
and as the Lakewood Orthodox Jewish population continues to grow, it will make up more and more percentage of the district, especially in redistricting. They might have to drop off other parts, which further entrenches just the VOD's power and able just control.
It's going to be a single municipality district at some point.
Yeah,
for sure.
But even now, the lake,
there's a danger of it at one point reaching the point where you have to do a change to the law.
Yeah.
Where it's not there's like this math problem that New Jersey has never actually had to confront, where a municipality is not big enough for a district on its own, but only surrounded by municipalities that, if combined with them, would make it too big. And then the law doesn't really account for that.
I think there are some Democrats who want that. They want, and not just for this situation, but in other, they would like to see municipal splits. They would like to see, yeah.
It'd be nice if Trenton could be half in 15 and half in 14 for them.
Right.
Yeah. We're going there. What's next? 20? Is it 25?
25 or 2?
Should we go 25?
Yeah.
I said on our live stream last week that if there was going to be a Democratic upset, it would be here, and it was.
Yeah. I mean, it's Ora Dunn, I'm not saying that Barranco didn't work, but Ora Dunn, was, better relationship with some of the Democrats. Joey, you had the pronunciation of the name?
I mean, I don't know whether it's right, but Steve Pilipchuk is how I've been saying it.
Yeah. I mean, Morristown councilman, and I was told today, one of the things that's, in addition to Mikey Sherrill and her representing most of this district in the House, is there was a mayor's race in Morristown where Tim Doherty had an independent that was was a Democrat, and he really worked it, and they pulled out even more voters than they were going to get otherwise. So I mean, this is this district absolutely in play in 2 years, and and the question, the question.
Well, Barranco told you he's coming back,
Yes,
right?
he did, and and I look at so now, or they could be looking at a primary, and one of the things, and I don't know this. I mean, I'm making a guess here, but Joe Hathaway, mayor of Randolph, who is going to run in this, is the Republican in this special election in the 11th. If that is not successful, and he has now boosted that name ID and built a donor base from running for Congress, he becomes a formidable candidate in a Republican primary for the assembly in this district. And there's no line. And then you've got Senator Bucco, who probably will run again, just reelected as minority leader. But this could be a tough Senate race, and whether it's Marissa Sweeney or Darcy Drager or whoever else is put in here. This
Christine Clark.
I mean, Christine Clark, who was asked to run, and then from what I was told, didn't fully understand that when the Democratic Assembly Campaign Committee committed X number of dollars, it doesn't mean we're writing you a check. And here's your, we're going to present this check to you. Now go run the campaign. That amount of money meant, all the things that they were going to do for them, and polling in the back of the house on turning out, vote by mail and digital and everything like that. So she got angry and said, nope, not running. And Sweeney and Steve from Morristown got.
Not even trying.
They ran on the Fulop slate, and the organization didn't find any candidates.
This organization didn't particularly want to find any candidates. These were two people who Morris Democrats basically liked.
Yeah.
So they are not necessarily not part of the Morris Democratic establishment, but they do come in. Well, not they, I guess, because only Sweeney won. Sweeney comes in without the sort of broader statewide institutional ties.
Yeah.
I've decided to eschew responsible political analysis to say that I think Ora Dunn won because of her picture with Elmo, which I think is among the best pictures we have of any legislator.
I mean, this actually is an interesting case. I don't know. The divide is not that big. 25.5% versus 25.0% is very small. But this is one of the relatively few districts where there is a pretty sharp ideological divide between the members, in part because Kristen Branco was originally elected to a different district and then was moved into this one, which is more competitive. I mean, Ora Dunn definitely fights against the Democrats a lot in Trenton, but generally has sort of a moderate posture and a moderate air. And Christian Branco is a little bit more on the sort of conservative wing of the caucus. So that's not true in a lot of districts. A lot of districts have legislators who, even if they don't like each other, are very ideologically kind of in tune with one another.
Yeah. I mean, this is if there's a Republican target list for 2027, if John DeMeo says, I've lost 11 in 2 years, I don't want to lose more, I want to pick up, where do you rank them as most likely to pick up?
I would probably go 2.
Then 3, then 25?
I was thinking 3, then 25. Yeah. It's hard to know exactly where Marissa Sweeney will be, but I was thinking 2, then 3, then 25. And then from there, I don't know, 8.
Yeah. 8 by default probably, but that's sort of one tier lower.
Yeah. I mean, and this is, you're going to see, Marissa Sweeney doesn't owe anybody anything in Trenton, but she's facing a tough reelection campaign in probably, still a Republican leaning district, she's going to need their help with fundraising. She's going to need their help getting bills passed.
You know what the problem is that Republicans won't be able to play in every district. They won't be able to afford it. They're going to have to triage. They're going to have to figure out what's most important. And I guess that'll matter on candidate quality. It'll matter on who's bringing the most money to the table themselves, that kind of thing. But they're really going to have to buckle down and figure out how many they can really play in.
And that becomes especially complicated when you're targeting potentially 2, 3, and 8, when South Jersey Democrats will be willing to spend a lot of money to protect them.
Yeah,
exactly.
And that's one of the problems in general. Like, I mean, you sort of theoretically think like, well, if the partisanship of the district is going a certain way, then it doesn't really matter how many we currently have, as long as we can just sort of flip them based on what the partisanship is. But that is kind of one of the things where, if you are having to scrounge up money and effort for even districts that you shouldn't really have lost in the first place, then that shifts attention away from the second tier of districts, like the districts that they were trying to flip this year, like 4 or 11. I don't know whether they'll be able to focus on those if they're busy dealing with things like trying to put out fires in 25 and 2.
The reaches become even longer reaches.
Yeah.
Whenever
yeah. And a lot of the money that comes because you think that there's a chance that they might control the chamber. That's not going to be money that's coming to them this
yeah.
time.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I got anecdotally learned anecdotally in the last 2 days is Republicans had some fundraising success, because people thought Chitterelli could win. And they thought, well, Jack Chitterelli is going to be governor, and he's asking us. Chitterelli is saying, let's elect more Republican legislators, so I have people that are going to help me enact my agenda. We talked early on about, how did crappy polls hurt? It's because it helped Republicans raise money in legislative districts that
raise expectations.
Yeah, and so it's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard.
It's hard imagining an excited, thrilled Republican base in 2027 that is building and spending the money, and that only just further doubles down the
unless Governor Sherrill and the Democratic Assembly majority completely crap the bed and everybody turns wildly against them. But I don't even know if that's really possible anymore. I don't know if we have the level of thermostatic sort of like public opinion,
especially while Donald Trump will be in office.
Exactly.
I mean, look, you have a diminished local media that makes it really hard for legislators to develop their own independent identity without money, and it's going to be hard. I mean, at some point you might imagine Scutari and Coughlin saying, hypothetically saying to, a lobbying firm or an interest group or, people who would normally do fundraisers for Republicans, sure, do whatever you want. I'm not telling you what to do, but, you can only play for one party. So, we're okay. You want to go raise money for the Republicans? That's okay. We don't need your money, and don't give to us. We're not going to take it, and sort of freeze people out a little bit. And there's always that danger now that you're down, below, numbers where they need any Republican votes. Unless the Kim squad, becomes more of a problem for Coughlin. It's going to be, harder and harder for these guys to raise money. Go to District 2. Again, this one, Guardian won. I think Rowan's going to win. Joanne Familoro won. She ran for freeholder in that district. They sort of drew to help, flip it. She did well, but not well enough. Here she did well, not well enough. She won the primary by like 36 votes. Mm-hmm. But this district, if there's any place in the state that George Norcross wants to take somebody out, it's Vince Palestina.
Oh my God.
And Palestina's, a good candidate, and Palestina can raise money on his own, but you've sort of got, you've got Denny Levinson, the county executive, who is far more aligned with George Norcross than he is with Vince Palestina. George is going to come at Palestina. I don't think there's any doubt about it. He's coming for him. He's going to spend a whole lot of more money.
And when it gets personal, it's limitless. It's
yes.
like, you need another $1 million. What do you need, right? I mean, it just doesn't stop.
Look, the reason John Adler got to the Senate in the first place. Yeah. In 1991, one of the biggest wave elections for Republicans ever, they took out a Republican senator, an entrenched Republican senator, because of a grudge.
Right.
Because the governor had appointed George Norcross's father to the state racing commission. And the Republican governor appointed him, and this Democratic senator used courtesy, blocked George Norcross's father, and he said, "I don't care about anything else. We're taking this guy out."
Yeah.
And record spending, TV ads for John Adler, during the World Series and during Eagles games, and that sort of reset it. I'm not
back when TV mattered.
Yeah, but boy, I think 2 is going to be a sight to see, and you're right, it's personal.
Yeah,
it is one of those districts where I think it's maybe a little bit of the inverse of, say, 11, where when Republicans, and specifically when sort of the Republican team has the ability to control what voters are coming out. Mm-hmm. And where the Democratic turnout, especially in Atlantic City and Pleasantville, is less guaranteed, that definitely creates a less favorable situation for Democrats. I mean, I think Micah Sherrill won this district by, she's winning Atlantic County by 3 points or something. So that probably means she's winning the district by 7 or 8.
Yeah.
It was not great turnout in Atlantic City at all. It was poor. There were a lot of mainland voters. There were municipal elections. There were mayoral elections in some of the mainland communities, and that ginned up turnout.
Yeah,
but I just said without a sort of a strong Democratic vote getter at the top of the ticket that sort of makes it into not just turnout for the state legislative race for these state legislative candidates you maybe haven't heard of before, but instead turnout for Micah Sherrill, go vote for governor. In the absence of that in 2027, I do think that Zach was right to put this as the number one most vulnerable, or the number one target for Republicans to flip in 2027, just beat Rowan right back, is because of that. This is a district that just is not as friendly to Democrats. Sort of the more here it is.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So Sherrill won, and she won Atlantic by 7. And
she won by that much?
Yeah.
No, she's up by 3, I think.
I see 3.
Yes, 3.
So I think that this district is probably something like 7 or 8.
7, yeah.
Because this district basically is Atlantic County, but without its most Republican parts.
Buenos, yeah.
And the Hamiltons.
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
So again, this is Senate, and who knows what's going to happen there, but I think this is really interesting. Any other districts that that we should be talking about?
If we want to talk ones that weren't really on the field but came dangerously close to being on the field, 39 is one.
Yeah.
Also 23, John DeMayo's district, wasn't too close, but it was definitely closer than Republicans would have liked.
And 1 and 40 as well. I mean, these are just 39 of those 4. 39 is the one that's sort of like a closest competitive district, and the Democrats had like a real slate that was really, really gunning for it. So, and this is actually weirdly a part of the state where Sherrill did not do amazingly well. I think that Chittorelli probably won this district. So her coattails were going to be shorter here. But just in general, anywhere in the state. Oh, and 26 too. Again, Sherrill territory. That's Morris County. I'm looking at that one now. Yeah, I mean, Brian Bergen got 26.5% of the vote in the 26th district. Al Barlas got 26% of the vote in the 40th district. Those aren't like wildly encouraging numbers for Republicans. I don't necessarily think it means that any of these districts are super vulnerable in 2027 or beyond, but it does sort of like, it means that the bottom hasn't necessarily fallen out yet. Like there's more ground that Democrats can make up in these New Jersey races, the more nationalized they become and the more these suburbs just are willing to vote for any Democrat they can get their hands on.
Yeah. It's I mean, it's a big playing field for them. I want to talk a little just briefly about, they weren't general election districts, but talk about where we might, the effect of, Katie Brennan, Ravi Bala, Jerry Walker joining the assembly, and he's clearly eyeing, the Senate race against Angela McKnight. You've got Ed Rodriguez. This is just a different. I mean, Mike could go back, even before the governor days, to your legislative staff days. Tell me what Craig Coughlin, who the longest serving speaker in New Jersey history, now has a fifth term today, but a speaker's always got challenges. It's but
and the renegades are a problem. I mean, you want to bring the new members in who you are sure where they're coming from, right? And if somebody's getting traction during the campaign that you weren't behind, you're running out to that district and you're making a contribution so you can get them on the team. I'm sorry, I should have let you finish, but yeah, I mean they're the ones you stay up at night thinking about, because you're not sure where they're going to come from. You're not sure what they're going to do, especially in the leadership election. Go ahead.
An interesting, though, side effect of this Democratic wave is that it diluted, I think, the Renegades' power. And in a year where, Democrats lose 21, lose 11, lose 8, a couple, all of a sudden, Brennan, Bala, these other quote-unquote renegades are making up a much larger portion of 40 plus 1.
No, that's a really good point. We talked about giving legislative passes. They'll be able to give 16 passes and still pass a bill, right? I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's easy to kill something when you only need 5 renegade votes versus 16.
So anybody who wants to be off of anything can be off of it.
I do think we have to think about sort of the renegade caucus of maybe like 5 to 7 people who won, that 5 to 8 people. I feel like maybe 8 is the maximum. I'm trying to count up all the people who might be added to this. But then you also have to kind of think about like the scared straight caucus, Balveer Singh, Kevin Egan, Joe Danielson, Shama Hader, Ellen Park, Mike Venezia, William Sampson, all people who had really serious primary challenges and who, like, if leadership, let's just say there was a rerun of an Oprah type bill, which, by the way, Cheryl said that she would have opposed. That was one of the relatively few things that Cheryl very explicitly broke with Murphy on, is that she said she didn't like that bill. You're going to have a lot of legislators. Already, the leadership had to give out some passes on that Oprah vote in districts that were sort of more obviously progressive and competitive in a primary. And I think that now with the county line gone and with clear evidence that these incumbents can actually lose, like that's a real possibility in New Jersey now. It's not just that they have to keep their county chairperson happy. It's also that they have to keep their actual voters happy. That suddenly creates a whole new block of legislators who have to make a choice between either hewing ever closer to party leadership in the hopes of, getting like money and actual help in winning, or who have to go to leadership sometimes and say, listen, like I represent this progressive district and I've got this local council person who I think it wants to challenge me and I can't do this.
This is a good point because sometimes courage is not something you can contain to the courage caucus, right? I mean, if all of a sudden these 5 and 7 are doing their own thing, I can do my own thing too, because I can say to the county chair, when the county chair says, "What are you up to?" Say, "What are you going to do about it? You don't hold the line over my head anymore," right? So,
and you just saw how I came 400 votes from losing last time. Like, you want that to happen, huh?
exactly.
And one of there's going to be some course correction, some sort of behavioral changes that the New World Order is going to mandate. One of them is legislators are going to have to take, in safe districts, are going to have to take their fundraising more seriously, because all these people who, line plus safe general election district equals job security. And now they're going to, nothing's safe in a primary, and they've got to raise money. They can't take it for granted. They should, they can't spend money on stupid stuff because they don't have to worry about doing mail or doing TV or digital. They're going to have to, stockpile. They're going to have to stockpile money. This is going to be a dip in the floral industry in New Jersey. The legislators just, may not send flowers to everybody like they used to, because they have to save it to get those vote things. There's really not, there's this whole group of not so safe seats anymore, right? I mean, Joe Danielson, it was a safe seat for him as long as Kevin McCabe and Peg Schaefer allowed him to keep the seat. Now it's it's not the same. And
new category of swing district.
Yeah. I mean, so you're talking about safe district general versus competitive primary districts. What you saw with Katie Brennan and Ravi Bala is they raised plenty of money. They went, they went dollar to dollar with the Hudson County organization with Steve Fulop's candidates. And, legislators are going to have to learn how to be better fundraisers. They're going to have to be smarter fundraisers. They're going to have to be more disciplined about, well, let's not take the legislative staff out for a really expensive dinner. Let's save it because we may need it for a rainy day. And, I think you're going to see, the legend of Garnett Hall loom large to a lot of people, which is, when you get there, and for those who haven't followed it, because I really haven't talked about it much, but the bottom line is Garnett Hall, she didn't actually run for the assembly. She got a call saying, "Hey, because there was an opening in the district, they wanted somebody from Maplewood." And so Garnett Hall got a phone call that said, "Hey, would you like to be in the state assembly?" And she's, "Sure, that'd be fun." And and here she is. She's the deputy county clerk at $100,000. Now she picks up, increases her income by 50%. She doesn't raise money. She doesn't work it. She's out in the primary. So all of these people now, throughout. And by the way, not just Democrats, Republicans too. If they don't watch their their war chest, and they don't watch how much how they're building their base, they could be taken out by some renegade in the primary. Also, it's I don't know that we have safe seats anymore. In terms, you might have safe seats for generals, but you don't have safe seats as much in terms of protecting your ability to get reelected at all.
It's kind of exciting for us.
Yeah.
We'll look at, we're always going to have exciting races. We'll have exciting, I think there are some districts where that'll be more active in the primaries, and there's some districts that'll get hotter general elections. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. I'll ask you, Zach, this is a question that I had talked to some people about in the last 2 days. So legislative salaries are going to go from 49 to 82,000 in January. It's a significant increase. It's a fair increase. given how hard a lot of legislators are expected to work. I don't begrudge that at all, but will that make legislators try and hang around longer than they used to? Tremendous amount of money for for part-time to full-time. It depends by the way, depends how you define part-time. There are a lot of legislators who have day jobs and they spend 40 hours a week being a legislator. But is it going to make it harder for somebody to walk away now?
A $33,000 raise does sound nice.
Yeah.
Objectively.
Yeah.
Hard to argue against that. I mean, it depends on who. Like, I don't think John Bramnick is going to be like, you know what? I was on the fence in running for re-election, but now I got that bump. I think I do think there is a strong argument in just saying it makes it more equitable and more accessible, because I'm from South Carolina, and I think at least back when I was down there, the pay was in the tens of thousands of dollars, like 15 or 25 or something in that realm. And one of the arguments is that how are teachers supposed to be able to run and stuff like this? I don't know. I'll go and ask assembly members if they're sticking around for that extra 30 grand. But it could be, but I don't see that being too much of a reason.
And my home state is the opposite. New York is a full-time legislature that I think has the highest pay of any state legislature in the country. And then the New York City Council is even higher. And that's sort of like, it's an easy attack line. Like, you're going up and passing these terrible laws in Albany and you're getting paid $150K for it. But it also means that people can, from all walks of life, if they
normal people, there can't in South Carolina, there cannot be a normal person elected, because then they also have to spend another 40 hours a week doing a random job to actually supplement their life.
Right. And in Congress, it's why AOC could have gone from obscure activist / bartender / woman around town to, full-time congressperson who can just do that life, because Congress pays. I mean, members of Congress will talk about how it's even hard to work on a congressional salary, but it pays enough that that's your job and that's what you can do. And so, I think, what is the new salary? Is it 88K? 82.
Yeah.
That's maybe not enough to be a New Jersey homeowner with 2 kids, but it is enough that it's, you don't have to supplement it with an entire extra full-time job just to have a real life in New Jersey. So that's probably a positive.
Yeah.
I wrote my undergrad thesis on part and full-time legislatures, and a million years ago came to the conclusion that New Jersey is a commuter legislature, because we are close enough that everybody can get to the Capitol within a couple hours. And so we don't have to go to sessions that are a month long or whatever, that kind of thing. We can go throughout the year. Doesn't mean they do go throughout the year. Dirty little secret, right? They still take big breaks like everybody else. But I think legislators now are holding on to the power, and maybe this adds a little more incentive. But I think the primary incentive is to hold on to the power, and especially on the Senate side, of course.
And well-connected assemblymen will have no issue, if they wanted to, getting jobs that pay similarly or more in government.
But not part-time. So you get an assembly member who has a full-time job, and now they're making $82,000 on top of that. And granted, they're making tremendous sacrifices, right? They're giving up their nights, they're giving up their weekends. They've got to, not do their job sometimes 2 days a week. But it's, if they lose, I'll use Garnett Hall as an example. If she goes back to, she remains in her deputy county clerk position, but she can't find a part-time job on top of that would make her $82,000. That's hard to replace. And somebody said to me today, I have never thought about it. I don't know that it's true, other than it made sense to me that the senators are in a better financial situation personally than most of their assembly colleagues. that senators tend to be personally more wealthy than assembly members. I don't know.
They're older. They're older. I do know that.
More established.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I want to close before we do closing thoughts and everything. We've got to talk about Mayor of Jersey City. This is now a runoff between former Governor Jim McGreevey and Jersey City downtown Councilman James Solomon. We're running, and you're going to hear me rant about a little about this probably next week on the Inside Edge, but I have not yet figured out how they're going to do this, because they have in Jersey City, in Hoboken, and in Hillside, we don't know who the second candidate is in the runoff. The statute says that vote by mail ballots need to go out 45 days before an election. That was October 19th. And I don't think they're going to make it. And if they're not going to know the name of the other runoff candidate until these elections are certified, till the cure letters are done, and there's not much of a campaign at the council. Yet again, another example of the legislature passing some laws without looking at the effect on another. But so
deadlines are merely advisory.
Yeah. So we don't know who's going to be in the city council runoff in Jersey City, but McGreevey was a couple thousand votes behind Solomon.
He was.
The percentages are this is a tough race there. What do you? I mean, Micah, you worked for Jim McGreevey.
I did, and it's funny. I was sitting next to John Wisniewski on election night, and John Wisniewski was his legislative running mate for the one term that McGreevey was in the legislature. And Eric Landskroner asked, "What does he have to do?" And we turned to each other and laughed and said, "He's got to cut deals, and that's what he's got to do, right? And that's what he's going to do." And I wouldn't count him out at this point. You're right that he starts a little bit behind. I was struck by the fact that the organization favorites in both Jersey City and in Hoboken finished number 2. Mm-hmm. That's sort of a new day here. In what world do the Hudson County Democrats finish number 2? Of course, it's an election that doesn't count. It's not for all the marbles, but it's still something you're not used to seeing. And it definitely, you start with a little bit of a liability there. You start a little bit behind. You got to make up some ground, but you've got a month to figure it out. And you've got a number of candidates who are not in the race now that maybe have some votes that they potentially can try and transfer your way. Yeah. We'll see what happens. It's going to be a big urban machine, very interesting race to watch for the next month.
Joey, are the unsuccessful candidates, do they have the ability to deliver their voters, or
that's up to them?
No, but I'm saying,
I have no idea. I would assume usually in these elections, when you have lots of different candidates with really concrete bases, and then you get winnowed down to 2, and the remainder endorse somebody, like that's both helpful from an endorsement perspective, and it's sort of an indication of how their base is feeling about the runoff.
Yeah.
But these like Hudson County elections and Jersey City and Hoboken elections in particular, and these nonpartisan races with all these different coalitions, they're chaotic beasts. I think I wasn't obviously covering it, but you look back at Steve Fulop's first win in 2013. Some of the coalitions that formed then, I feel like a ways before that election, people would have been quite surprised to see a lot of the coalitions that formed. So I really don't know what that's going to look like.
And you've got almost 63,000 votes, benefiting it wasn't close. It didn't matter, but I'd sort of noticed that this may be the most helpful that Steve Fulop was to Mikey Sherrill, is by moving the Jersey City race from May to November. helping to boost Democratic turnout there.
And then by not running for
Yeah.
re-election.
So here's the question of the 63,000 people who voted in a November 25 general. What do you think we're looking at for a December 2nd, the Tuesday after Thanksgiving?
Yeah, it's going to be a fraction. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. That's why Fulop and others have argued for
Ranked choice voting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, the instant electronic runoff. Yeah.
I mean, Joey, you covered this a little bit when you were working in Trenton. No, I'm not getting a sense of an appetite for ranked choice voting in New Jersey. So.
No, not really. I think in part because legislators, I remember there was some sort of hand-wringing even about a fundamentally pretty minor bill to allow people who will turn 18 by a general election date to be able to vote in the primary. And there was some concern from Republicans about like constitutional issues or whatever, but the concern from Democrats was, I don't know who those voters are, and I don't know whether they'll vote for me and in a primary. I think the Democratic majority in Trenton, above all else, is a cautious beast, and one that, when it comes to its own elections, really does not like to futz with the mechanisms that have allowed it to exist. That's why you saw such resistance to reforming the county line until literally no other choice was presented to them. So I think it would make a lot of sense for these races. It would save a lot of money. It would save a lot of time. It would make a lot of sense for these, especially nonpartisan municipal elections. That is like the ultimate candidate for a ranked choice voting system to exist. But I don't know whether it's not going to be their top priority.
The select ballot committee. I remember there were some very long and convoluted conversations about relatively simple topics, and I can only imagine how ranked choice discussions would go from there. So.
Sometimes all you need to do is listen to a committee hearing, and you're like, these are just people.
Yeah, but you know what they could do and should do is they could make it permissive. They could let a city decide that they're going to opt into it if they wanted to.
I think that's what Zwicker's bill. I think that's what Andrew Zwicker's bill did.
Yeah.
And speaking of Zwicker bills, we're going to have to watch, how they do.
NJ11 special.
Yeah, this 11th special.
That's my job now.
Yeah,
this is a rock and a hard place because you have to decide between speeding up the special election. And of course, it makes sense that if it takes 4 months, I don't know if I have the numbers right, correct me. If it takes 4 months to do two elections, a primary and a general, then it's going to take half the time to just do a general. But if you do that, if you trade speed for the primary, then you are. It's not the pissed off progressives. That's not the problem. Sorry, progressives. The problem is we just went through a year and a process in which a primary was a really good way to build party involvement, voter interest. It was a good process for Democrats this year. It was a good process for Republicans to go through without the line. Voters like choices. You're going to have a lot of good candidates in this race. Voters like to make good choices. I say this as a former proponent of the line in favor of strong parties. This was a great process. A lot of people say that primary participation is a good predictor of general participation. You get more people voting in a primary, you get more people voting in a general. I don't know that you want to short circuit the primary process here. I think you want to build the involvement.
I don't know if that's even under consideration. I'm not really sure if that's still. I know that was like the bill that's being discussed with that. I'm not sure if what I've heard about the proposals to tighten up the schedule are either to like literally just make some of the deadlines quicker within sort of like the primary and then general, and or to make it so that once Cheryl's victory is certified, then that can trigger the writ of special.
Well, that would be good news. Yeah, that would be good news if they weren't sacrificing the primary there.
Right, and we don't know when Mikey Cheryl's going to resign. We know she has to resign by January 20th, but we don't know. With all the uncertainties in Washington, we don't know when the most convenient time for the Democrats to be down one vote for a couple months might be.
And they don't either, because
They
it's
don't.
up to Mike Johnson whether the House exists or not. And he has decided for the last month and a half that it does not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right now, who cares whether the seat is empty or not? For the
Right.
moment.
Democrats could have 0 votes in the House and they'd be like, whatever.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about this too long, but Joey, how many members of the Jersey delegation agreed not to take a salary during the shutdown?
Oh God, I lost track. I just kept on adding it to my story when I got people texting me. It was like 8.
Yeah, I mean, did you think how many of them bargained for no paycheck for this long? I mean,
I should check in with all those people and be like, so are you really still doing that?
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Let's just do some your closing stuff, and let's we've got thousands of people watching this. I mean, people, thank God we're not the only political junkies out there, but I don't want to keep people too long and overstay this. But let's go back to this election, governor, assembly, any points that weren't brought up that you guys want to talk about.
I can't help but wonder if this is just another year and what will become more and more dramatic thermostatic swings that just no matter what happens, the party and the presidency will just be obliterated and face just pure chaos. And obviously we will see in 2020, 9 or whatever, the years count away in my head. But it is, if this pattern keeps up, you start to wonder how much actually depends on the individuals in New Jersey as opposed to just how much of New Jersey depends on Washington.
Yeah, I think when you guys have talked about how much the individual's difference the individual make, it reminds me of a discussion you kind of have about a parliamentary system, about how much of a difference the individual candidates make versus a vote on the party level. And I think our elections are certainly not parliamentary, but they resemble parliamentary in that way. I think the thing, not to get too political science about it, but you don't know what kind of pattern you're looking at until you're through it, right? You can never tell. But it certainly looks like what you just talked about, Zach, where we've had some swings to the left, we've had some swings to the right, and I guess the time warp. I think you can expect to continue to see that based on the circumstances of who's got the White House, who's got the State House, whether there's an overreach, whether there needs to be a correction on the part of voters. But what that means to me for the foreseeable future, maybe not down the line where we get another White House, but for the foreseeable future, next year, you're looking at Cory Booker at the top of the ticket again. You're looking at that 15-point margin that senators typically win by in New Jersey, Democratic senators. Hold on. Sorry. Somebody else, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'll continue a little bit and say that, if this trend continues and becomes more severe, I start to worry about, and I don't want to step too much on a takeaways article that Joey and I are preparing for tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. Yeah. But I don't doubt that also Micah Sherrill was a strong candidate who also helped decide her own fate this year. But if New Jersey's results are simply decided by thermostatic reaction to the White House and becomes more and more disconnected from what actually happens in New Jersey and how people govern in New Jersey, that just strikes me as potentially dangerous for just how voters react and assess governance in the state, and potentially how voters just develop feedback to the state's politicians. So
you might
I hope you go ahead.
No, you guys.
I was wrapping up. I hope that disconnect doesn't get too severe, because I think that could have some bad side effects in the end.
You want a bad governor to actually face consequences for being a bad governor, in theory.
And you want a good governor to face good consequence. And if that just goes away and it's simply like, oh, I don't like Donald Trump, or I don't like Joe Biden, or I don't like, and it just no longer becomes an actual referendum on governance in New Jersey, then that's where you start to just like things start falling apart.
Yeah, I understand but it's also the lever that voters have, right? That's the
Right.
that's the mechanism they've got is hold one party or the other responsible. And I don't know if you want them not to have that either, you know.
Also, my concluding thought will be on the slightly more optimistic note that, like, I'm glad that so many people turned out. I'm glad that, you know, regardless of the outcome it produced, it's always been, you know, a little bit of a wrinkle in the kind of, well, it's great that New Jersey has these off-year elections because it means that we're sort of thinking about these things independently. And sure, although that maybe wasn't even that true this year because it was so nationalized, but you know, it's only a smaller slice of the electorate that's really doing that independent thinking. And this year it was a bigger slice than it's been in a while. After voters react to these off-year elections apathetically a lot. And I think it's an optimistic sign that wasn't true this year. I've seen some Republicans, including some like, you know, randos on Twitter, or whatever, but also some relatively prominent Republicans being like, how is it that, you know, Democrats increased their vote share by this much? This is suspicious. No, it isn't.
No.
Like, it was actually quite predictable given that the primary also blew through all kinds of voting records.
Exactly.
And there's no evidence.
And when parties spend millions and millions of dollars on get out the vote, when
the
they expect a competitive election, that's going to
$250 million.
You know, when the RNC is like, here's your sixth time reminding you to vote, that tends to have an effect on turnout. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so don't listen to that garbage, but do listen to the message that the voters sent, which is, you know, beyond just the results, the fact that they're engaged and care about the future of New Jersey. So I think that can only be spun as a positive.
So, you know, I need to start out mine with a correction of a mistake that I made that was pointed out by one of our viewers, Ben of George Washington University.
Raise high.
Who pointed out that it is
wow, the rolling eyes.
It is not Carol Murphy's record. Brian Rumpf received nearly 70,000 votes.
Wow.
In the 9th district.
Wow, that will.
Sorry, Carol. Sorry, Michael. You know, but
and sorry, Anthony Bucco, and sorry, Ora Dunn.
Yeah,
Darcy Trey has been swept with you by Brian Rumpf.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, you know that is, you know, that kind of turnout in Ocean County, and
hats off.
You know, just, you know, that district you just can't beat with. You know, I also
you could split that in half, David, and in some districts you could win.
It would be enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
well, I mean, so 70,009. I think oftentimes the lowest turnout district is 29.
Yeah.
Shanique Spite won with 23,000.
Yeah. So Carol Murphy still holds the record for the most votes ever received by a Democrat in a legislative race, and Brian Rumpf now, holds that record for a Republican, and it's a lot of votes, and it is significantly more than because I went to check Carol's vote totals. I noticed that I'm going to have to get an explanation for this because this is going to gnaw at me. There is a write-in vote for governor in Burlington County. It was cast for Matthew Alexander Collier (myself), and yet it's showing up in the. This is going to cause the conspiracy theorists a lot, but it's showing up as 0 votes.
Uh-oh.
I don't understand that, but I'm gonna have to get an explanation for that. The other thing
I also can't help but laugh at someone sacrificing their secret ballot by writing myself next to their name. I know that person voted for.
Yeah.
Isn't there some Oprah rule like that can't be disclosed now because it identifies them? Isn't there some rule
when you do it yourself, though, do you sacrifice that? Is that is that First Amendment?
Waived it, right?
Yeah. Now Assistant Attorney General Susan Scott's going to be sending a memo to the Burlington County Board of Elections saying you have to take this vote out and whatever. I don't know what it is, but it's there. On a more serious note, one one of my pet projects during election time is to raise attention to people not being disenfranchised easily, and telling people to, one at a time, if you feel like you should be voting, don't get turned away, speak up, going before a judge. You guys know that I have never hesitated to call out a judge for a bad election ruling. I got to tell you, I have never seen a judiciary more focused on voting rights than they were in this election, and giving every possible benefit of a doubt to a voter, and taking tremendous amount of time to make sure that people aren't disenfranchised. It's now it may be the difference between what used to be with Glenn Grant and what you have now with Judge Michael Blee running the administrative office of the courts. But it was really quite impressive. And since I bitch and complain when they're quick to disenfranchise people, they deserve a lot of praise for that. And I think that's just really important. And the other thing is this election, from a, you guys make fun of me on it, but from a process point of view, this ran really well just about everywhere. This was a fair election.
Mm-hmm.
Election officials from both parties did a good job.
Even counted votes fast as hell.
Really fast.
Yeah.
I mean, we weren't waiting. We had, the only reason we have an uncalled race in the assembly is because it's close,
right?
Not because we're waiting. There are exceptions. Jerry Majette in Somerset County, administrator of the Board of Elections, terrible, awful. He should be. I can't understand how he is still employed.
That was an embarrassing hole in the middle of the map all night long.
He just went. He just left. He just left. The Board of Election members went home. Jerry Majette is a problem, but short of that, I mean, election officials did great. This is
even with the attempted interference with the bomb threats at several.
Yeah, they reacted well.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have you didn't have machines shutting down. The connectivity issues worked.
Yeah.
What a great way for Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State Tahisha Wei to go out with this nearly flawless election. And whether you are a Democrat or a Republican or a fan of the Murphy administration or not, it is indisputable that Tahisha Wei has improved the way elections run in New Jersey. And
we are light years from where we were. Yeah,
we really are. We really are. We, a few more legislative fixes on stupid stuff, and we can be even better. But with elections officials doing their job really well, with judges reacting quickly, we're not in where we were a couple of years ago. This is
and
really
now our final plea to the few county clerks that haven't done so: please release detailed results.
Yes,
your fellow clerks have been able to do it. Please join them. Yeah. I mean, the smart one's going to go hire Ryan Dubicki and have them completely modernize their systems and have everything work really well. But we're in better shape because of that. There are, and I'm going to get in trouble with some people for saying it, but it's what I believe. Part of this strong turnout is because there are more ways to vote than ever before. It has never been easier to vote. It's only going to get better, and heavy turnout is better for democracy than a 4% turnout in some special school referendum election. So just keep it going. That's it. That's all I have. Anything else? Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Micah Rasmussen, Zach Blackburn, Joey Fox. This is always fun, and we'll be back next year, right? I mean, next year we're not, unless you guys want to do Jersey City runoff.
December, maybe.
Yeah.
Let's see how that one goes.
I can tell by the looks on your faces, we're going to do it. It's just going to be Mike and I.
Maybe. Maybe.
But we'll see where it works. Phil Elagia has offered to come on. We'll have him too. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.